Chapter 41. As Brian had said, once it started snowing in Border Town, it wouldn't stop. In one night, the town had been wrapped in a layer of white gauze. In the early morning, the snow had weakened, and there were occasionally a few scattered snowflakes falling from the sky, but the sky was still gray. Thinking that they wouldn't see the sun for several months, Roland felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. This was simply illogical, he thought, although it was strange to look for common sense in a world where witches had magic. But how could the demonic beasts affect the weather? Unfortunately, he didn't have a weather satellite to tell him the specific distribution of the world's clouds. On the way to the Western Wall, Carter couldn't help but sigh. The town has become a lot more deserted. There are still a group of people who have followed the nobles to evacuates. That's good, at least they won't hold us back. Roland exhaled a breath of white air. I have already arranged for Barov to conduct a census this winter. What is that? It is to go door to door to do statistics. How many people are left? What are the names of each family? What are their occupations? And then record it, Roland explained. In this way, whether it is the deployment of human resources during the war or the distribution of pensions after the war, it can be implemented quickly and effectively. A human resources? Carter blinked, then smiled. Your Highness, you are really different from before. In the past, although you would say some things that I didn't understand, and do some inexplicable things, but, after all, those things were not in line with your identity as a prince. But now, Carter paused for a moment, as if considering his words, whether it is those strange training regulations you set, or the novel experimental products from the alchemy workshop, the results are surprisingly effective. Perhaps this is what my grandfather said. The reason why extraordinary people are extraordinary is that they can always see the things that ordinary people ignore. I have a feeling that maybe you can really become the next king. Really? Roland suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Was there anything more satisfying than being recognized after a struggle? For a moment, he felt that his hands and feet were full of strength, and the gray sky wasn't so annoying. Walking up the wall, he saw the militia clearing the snow on the aisle. When they saw the prince, they all bowed in salute. I should have taught them to salute, Roland thought. How was it last night? We haven't found any traces of demonic beasts, Iron Axe answered him. Your Highness, according to past experience, after the first snowfall, we still have a relatively stable period. During this period of time, there are not many demonic beasts, and most of the mutated ones are weak animals. Roland nodded, then continued to be vigilant. The area behind the city wall had been transformed into a barracks. When the alarm was not sounded, most people would rest in the barracks to conserve their energy. The patrols were rotated. Considering the low temperature in winter, each team would only patrol for 4 hours before being replaced. These measures were all set by Roland one by one. He had asked Brian and learned that Longsong Stronghold had no plan to resist the demonic beasts. The unluckiest recruits would be sent to monitor the movements of the demonic beasts and would have to stay on the city wall for a whole day. Therefore, there were often cases of laziness and desertion. During the winter, because of dereliction of duty or violation of military orders, as many as 20 or 30 people would be hanged. As for the traces of demonic beasts, it was even more chaotic. There was no division of defense, nor was there a designated person responsible. Thinking of the level of war in this era, Roland also understood. It was an era of extreme emphasis on individual bravery, emphasizing honor and plunder. Even the knight would be hot-blooded and rush to the front, so it was better not to ask for too much. Patrolling along the wall, it seemed that everything was going well, but Roland found that he had overlooked a problem. That was the barricades. These barricades were still clearly leading the demonic beasts to the middle of the wall, but if Brian was right, 2 to 3 months of snow would eventually fill up all the barricades. At that time, any point of the 600-meter line of defense could become the route of the demonic beasts. His men simply had no time to take care of such a large area. It was also impossible to send people to clear the snow. A few agile demonic beasts were enough to make the team suffer heavy losses. Perhaps he still had to rely on the power of the witches. For example, he could let Nightingale sneak out of the town with Anna, ignite a fire to melt the snow, and then sneak back, just like how she had stolen Nana from the Pine family. At this moment, the observation post on the left side of the wall shouted, "Look in front." Roland and Carter looked in the direction he was pointing. A small shadow crawled out of the snow and slowly moved towards the wall. "Your Royal Highness, do you think we should?" The hunter in charge of the defense turned his head and asked. "According to the previous drill, you should decide whether to blow the horn or not," Roland said. "Moreover, you have more experience than me in this regard." He hesitated, but finally just pulled the string of the crossbow and continued to stand on the wall to observe. Roland nodded with satisfaction. For now, the order on the wall was still well maintained. But he didn't know if they could quickly organize the defense according to the drill steps when a large number of demonic beasts attacked Border Town. The shadow gradually moved closer, and when it was about 50 meters away from the wall, Roland could clearly see the appearance of the demonic beasts. Was it probably a fox mutant? Its fur was grayish-black, its eyes were red, and it came to the wall while panting. "This guy seems to have been infected not long ago, so it's not a big threat," Iron Axe said as he aimed his bow. "You said that they were infected by the breath of hell and were expelled to the west?" "Not only to the west," Carter came over and said, "when the gates of hell opened in the barbarian land, any place that wasn't blocked by the impassable mountain range would be attacked by the demonic beasts, especially the big gap in the north." The impassable mountain range, which stretched for more than 10 miles, seemed to have been cut off, which was the main direction of the demonic beast's attack. This manic monster wandered for a moment under the wall, then raised its head, grinned at the people on the wall and growled. When it was about to jump, Iron Axe released the bowstring, and a sharp arrow accurately pierced its neck, firmly nailing it to the ground. Roland noticed that the blood coming out of the wound was black. Chapter 42. What will happen if you are bitten by a demonic beast? Roland asked. "Will you become like them?" "I hope it won't be a different version of Resident Evil," he thought. With the current level of technology, there was no way to extract the virus antigen. "Of course not," Iron Axe said with an expression of, "How can you ask such a question? If you are bitten, you will only become a corpse." "What about their meat? Can it be eaten?" Carter exclaimed, "Your Highness! How can this kind of evil thing be eaten? They are all contaminated by the breath of hell." Roland looked at Iron Axe. The latter nodded and said, "Your knight is right. I have cut the meat of a demonic beast and fed it to the hounds, but the hounds soon died after eating the meats." "Really? What a pity," Roland sighed. In this era the source of food was very scarce. If the demonic beasts could be eaten, winter would simply be the month of harvest. Think about it, all the animals in the forest would run crazily to Border Town, even saving hunting tools. After patrolling the city wall, he decided to visit Nana. Today, the closest noble house to the city wall had been requisitioned by Roland for use as a field hospital. Of course, to the outside world it was called a medical hospital. Just in case, this was the most heavily guarded place in Border Town, besides the city wall. When the owner of the house returned to Longsong Stronghold, he took all the property he could take with him, plus Border Town itself was a place that could be abandoned at any time, so although the house was large, there were no murals, carpets, porcelain, or any other decorations. If it wasn't clean, it would simply look like an ownerless house that had been vacant for a long time. Roland broke all the wooden partitions on the first floor, except for the corridor and the hall, so that all the other rooms were connected as a whole, and then placed 10 beds. A simple hospital was formed. There were no nurses, no doctors, and even the 10 beds were unlikely to be used. Nana's treatment didn't require her to stay in bed to recuperate, it would be effective immediately. During the day, she was on standby on the second floor of the hospital, and when Anna had nothing to do, she would come to accompany her. Sir Pine and Brian were responsible for guarding the first floor. There were also 2 guards outside the door. It could be said that nothing could go wrong. But what Roland did not expect was that the first casualty received by the field hospital was not from the militia defending the city wall, but from the workers of the North Slope mine. Nail felt that his hands were trembling. Hearing Tai Tu's miserable cries that had already become hoarse, he quickened his footsteps once more, even wishing that he could fly. All of this was because of his negligence, he thought. Damn it, how could he have forgotten Sir Knight's instructions? If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have accepted the job of controlling the big guy. Ever since the big black machine was installed at the entrance of the mine, the miners' work had become much easier. Originally, the most tiring task was to transport the excavated ore out of the mine. When the mining basket was filled with stones, it would require 3 to 4 people to drag it. Usually, 2 people would push from the back and the rest would pull from the front. After many years of mining, the originally uneven ground of the tunnel had been ground flat by the mining basket, and the iron pad at the bottom of the mining basket also needed to be replaced frequently. A week ago, the chief knight commanded Tai Tu and his men to transport a lot of strange metal parts up the mountain, and after a few days of tossing and turning, they assembled a furnace. Nail had never expected that this furnace could actually move by itself after the fire was ignited. Not only could it move, but it also had extraordinary strength. Sir Knight said that this was the invention of His Royal Highness, and it seemed to be called the steam engine. As long as the hemp rope was tied tightly to the mining basket and the fire was ignited, this big guy would hum, turn the capstan, and quickly pull the mining basket out of the mine. It was simply incredible. After Sir Knight demonstrated it several times, he asked Tai Tu to choose a person to be responsible for operating the steam engine. When Nail was chosen, he was very happy for a long time. Thinking about it, as long as he stayed in front of this machine, he would never have to go down to the mine to dig stones or push the basket. The collapse last time had given him quite a fright. So what Sir Knight told him, Nail firmly kept in mind. It was not difficult to say. When he needed the big guy to work, he just needed to lift the green lever and press the red lever. Sir Knight said that the green lever was connected to the inlet valve, and the red lever was connected to the exhaust valve, so that the steam would enter the cylinder through the pipeline. After the mining basket was pulled up, if he wanted to stop the machine, he had to do the opposite. He had to lift the red lever and press the green lever, so that the steam would be discharged from the pipe on the side of the boiler. After each cycle, he had to replenish the water in the furnace. Although he did not understand what the valve and the cylinder meant, Nail had to do it one by one. However, Sir Knight stressed that he had to pay attention to 2 things. First, the sequence could not be wrong. When it was started, the green must be followed by the red, and when it was shut down, the red must be followed by the green. If he made a mistake, it could lead to the destruction of the machine. Second, when it was vented, he had to first clear the surrounding miners, and he had to constantly remind them until the red lever was completely lifted. The first point was memorized by Nail. He could not make a mistake even with his eyes closed, but the second point was wrong. Today, when the machine was shut down as usual, there was no one around. He felt that shouting a warning in vain would make him look like a fool, so he lowered his head and pulled the red lever. The lever was a little tight, so he clenched his teeth and spent a long time to pull it up. Unexpectedly, the moment he pulled it up, Iron Head appeared in front of the furnace. Nail swore that he did not see where Iron Head came from, and the loud roar of the machine also covered his footsteps. White steam whistled out from the exhaust port and rushed straight to Iron Head's face. Nail was scared on the spot. He saw Iron Head suddenly fall to the ground, rolling around with his hands covering his face and letting out a shrill scream from his mouth. The scream made Nail's hair stand on end. Soon, other miners surrounded Iron Head, who was rolling on the ground, and forcibly opened his hands. Iron Head's face was blurred, blood oozed from the cooked rotten flesh, and his eyes turned into white beads. Everyone present realized that Iron Head could not be saved. When Nail came to his senses, tears came out of his eyes. Iron Head had always taken care of him. Seeing that he was young, Iron Head always assigned less work than others, but he had never been paid less. Now, it was because of his negligence that this accident happened. In grief and anxiety, Nail suddenly remembered what Sir Knight had said. If someone was accidentally injured in the mining area, he could take the injured to the newly opened medical hospital near the city wall. Although he knew that such a serious injury could not be cured, because the wound was too big and the herbal medicine could not work, it would only continue to rot, and then the whole body would become hot, and soon he would fall into a coma. But he still carried Iron Head on his back, gritted his teeth, and ran to the foot of the mountain, regardless of the surprise of the people around him. Chapter 43. Where's Sister Anna? Nana heard the sound of footsteps coming from the stairs. She ran to the door and looked, but was disappointed to find that it was His Royal Highness. She's still working. She'll probably come back later. Work? Nana had recently heard this word from the prince's mouth. Do you mean burning the gray mud powder? For the time being, Nana pouted and went back to the table. I also have a job, she thought. I have to stay here and treat those who were injured defending the town. What? Anna isn't here, so you're bored? Roland smiled, pulled out a chair and sat by the fireplace. Yes, Nana replied honestly, propping up her chin. It wasn't that she didn't want to treat those who were injured, it was just too terrible. She still remembered the first time she treated Brian. The man's whole body looked like it was soaked in blood. The reddish-brown blood clots solidified on his chest. His mouth was like a dehydrated fish, spitting out red and white blood foam. Then, she fainted. It was really humiliating. Nana raised her head and secretly glanced at Roland. She found that he was leaning on the chair and snoring. It seems that the prince is also tired, she thought. Building the walls, training the soldiers, and protecting the town from demonic beasts, these are all his jobs. When he asked her to come here, she hesitated for a long time, but in the end she didn't refuse. You will also encounter something that makes you want to live, even if it's a struggle to live. Nana didn't quite understand the meaning of this sentence, but when she closed her eyes, Anna's appearance appeared in her mind. That pair of blue eyes were like a lake, slowly surrounding her. This was also the reason why she promised Roland. She wanted to be as strong as Sister Anna. Suddenly she heard footsteps downstairs again. Nana jumped down from the chair and wanted to see if it was Anna who came back, but she was stopped by an invisible hand. Wait a minute, there's more than one person. Nana patted her chest and said with dissatisfaction, You scared me, Sister Nightingale. The door was quickly pushed open. It was Brian, who was in charge of guarding the first floor. Miss Pine, please come down. Someone has been scalded. Was he going to work? Nana took a deep breath. I understand. She walked downstairs. 2 guards were busy carrying a person who kept screaming miserably to a bed. There was also a short man standing beside them, his face full of anxiety. Brian stepped forward and nimbly tied the wounded man's hands and feet to the bedside. The guard then carried the short man out of the room and pulled the curtain that served as a partition. What happened? Roland asked as he walked downstairs while rubbing his eyes. Your Highness, the North Slope mine has sent a seriously injured person. It seems that he was scalded. The prince walked over to take a look. It's a steam burn. Is there a problem with the prototype? Where's the person who brought him here? In the hall. Brian pointed in the direction of the door. I'm going to ask about the situation. I'll leave it to you, Roland said as he walked towards the exit. Nana slowly moved to the man's side, using her peripheral vision to look at him. She saw that the facial features on his face had turned into a paste. His originally red skin had turned into a dehydrated pale white, like a rag hanging on his face. His neck was full of bowl-sized blisters, some of which had already burst. The mucus that oozed out was mixed with blood, soaking the pillow. Under the flickering light of the fire, his appearance was even more terrible than the devil in her nightmares. She took 2 steps back, closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, her father was looking at her with concern. Are you okay? Nana nodded, thinking of what Roland had told her. Treat the wounded as if you were treating a small animal. She went back to the bedside and stretched out her hands. An incredible feeling emerged from her body and gathered in her palms. She saw a light green fluorescent liquid flowing out from her palms and dripping on the wounded man's face. Although this fluorescent light was so obvious, the people around her turned a blind eye to it. Then the wound began to change, the scalded skin continued to fall off, and new skin grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. The man's painful moans gradually stopped, and his breathing became steady, as if he had fallen into a deep sleep. Nana breathed a sigh of relief. Compared to the last time, her performance should have improved a lot, right? Oh my God, is this the healing power that His Highness had mentioned? This is the first time I've seen it, Pine exclaimed. My good daughter, you are really amazing. It's the power of God. Brian also sighed with emotion. When I was injured, it was Miss Nana who gave me a helping hand. I'm really grateful to you. Ah, this fool, Nana covered her face. Didn't he know that it was Sister Nightingale who had sneaked me out? When did that happen? Pine felt strange. How come I didn't know about it? Cough. Her power has nothing to do with God, it only belongs to the witches themselves. Roland opened the curtain and went back into the room, coughing twice to change the topic. How are the injuries of the people who were sent here? Basically healed, Brian said excitedly. It's as if they had never been injured. Your Highness, with Miss Nana's help, during the months of demons, everyone has a chance to survive. As long as they don't die on the spot, keeping their lives won't be a problem. The prince nodded, motioning Brian to wake the man up. You're called Iron Head, right? The man called Tai Tu sat up with a confused look on his face. Am I dreaming? No, Roland said. You are still alive. You are. I've seen you in the square. The man seemed to suddenly wake up, turning from the bed and kneeling on the ground. Your Royal Highness the Fourth Prince, did you save me? It was Miss Pine who saved you. She is a witch with the ability to heal. Nana's heart tightened. How could he say that she was a witch so directly? Sure enough, the way the man looked at her changed. Witch? Your Highness, they are not the devil. What nonsense are you talking about? My daughter has nothing to do with the devil. She is the one who saved your life. Mr. Pine stood up and shouted in dissatisfaction. My daughter has nothing to do with the devil. She saved your life. Do you think the devil will lend you a helping hand? Oh no. Please forgive me for my rudeness. Ironhead immediately bowed his head. Thank you for saving my life, Miss Pine. Nana suddenly felt inexplicably uncomfortable. She wanted to immediately rush out of the room, but there was a voice in her heart repeatedly reminding her, be strong. After Ironhead was sent away, Sir Pine worriedly asked, Is this really good, Your Highness? In this way, I'm afraid my daughter will not be able to live a normal life. Think on the bright side, Mr. Pine, the prince comforted. Only by breaking the deadlock during this period can Nana be truly free in the future. Otherwise, as she grows older, one day she will be exposed, and I'm afraid she can only live in isolation. Chapter 44. By the time Roland returned to the castle, it was already late, and the snow outside was getting heavier. He went into his bedroom, took off his coat, shook off the snow on his collar, and hung it on a hanger by the fireplace. Your Highness, don't you think this is too hasty? Nightingale appeared in front of the prince. Nana? Roland poured himself and Nightingale a glass of wine. Although this ale was much more bitter than the beer of his previous life, he had gradually become accustomed to this taste. Nightingale took the glass, but she didn't drink it. She was waiting for the prince's answer. There is no more suitable time than now. Roland drank the wine, and then filled his own glass again. If you want to display Nana's ability during the months of the demons, it is impossible to hide your identity as a witch. Being able to instantly cure a fatal injury is by no means possible with ordinary herbs or bloodletting. This is something everyone can think of. Thanks to this dispensable town located outside the western border, the influence of the church here is very limited. If I were them, I wouldn't be willing to squander the golden dragon in this place, which can be abandoned at any time, Roland continued. There isn't even a chapel in the town, and the missionaries have already returned to Longsong's stronghold with the nobles. At this time, what do you think Border Town looks like? An isolated island cut off from the outside world. Did you plan this long ago? Nightingale asked. Roland nodded. The heavy snow will cover the road to Longsong's stronghold, and the dock's shipping is in my hands. We have at least 3 months to change the view that witches are evil. If it is only propaganda, the effect will be extremely limited. We must rely on close contact in order to quickly eliminate this misunderstanding. This was the reason why he wanted to keep Nana. He wanted to create a different version of Nightingale. This legendary nurse, because of her dedication to taking care of the wounded, reduced the death rate from 42% to 2%, was given the title of the goddess of the lamp by the soldiers, and even the reputation of the entire nurse profession was raised to worship. Nana's ability was even more magical. She could use her magic to heal wounds. As long as they didn't die on the spot, they could be saved. This was probably more effective than any weapon in raising the morale of the militia. At the same time, thanks to her father being a declining nobleman, he often dealt with hunters and farmers. His attitude towards the commoners was very gentle, and even allowed Nana to study at the academy opened by Teacher Carr. If it were other nobles, even the lowest-ranking baron, they would not be willing to let their daughter be associated with this group of people. In their eyes, these people were the so-called untouchables. Can these really be done? Even Nightingale, in the face of such a colossal force like the church, seemed exceptionally powerless. If we don't take this step, we will never know the answer. Roland did not expect the entire town to change their minds because of this, but at least he had to hold the new team firmly in his hands. In the future, he would rely on these seeds from among the people to spread his ideas. 3 months was enough to change a lot of things. Nightingale was silent for a moment, then whispered, "Why do you want to do this for the witches? In order to liberate the productive forces, in order to obtain more power, in order to have a place in the future battle for the throne." Of course, these answers were not suitable to be said at this time. Although Roland was a mechanical dog, but he had also played a lot of dating games, he could be regarded as a veteran and had seen many things. The experience of more than 20 years of his 2 lives reminded him that at this time he was facing the answer to a key question. He carefully chose his words and slowly said, "Didn't I already tell you that Border Town doesn't care about one's background? I hope that one day, even a witch, can live like a free person in my territory." This time, Nightingale was silent for a long time, and the only sound in the room was the crackling of the burning charcoal. The side of her face was illuminated by the flickering flames, and it was like a beautiful picture. When she opened her mouth again, Roland had the illusion that time was flowing again. "In fact, you don't have to do this." Her voice was distant and soft. "Please forgive me for lying to you before. The Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association have been homeless for too long. They don't have too many extravagant expectations. As long as they have a place to live, they will be satisfied, even if it is in this castle." "What's the difference between that and a cage?" Roland shook his head, then suddenly seemed to understand, and stared at Nightingale. "Wait, you mean you are willing to bring them here?" Nightingale sighed, avoiding the prince's line of sight. "In this way, you will become the enemy of the church." "Their hands have already stretched too far," Roland said. "Once the slogan of the divine monarchy comes out, the conflict between the church and the countries of the continent is only a matter of time. As for Border Town, as long as it passes through these 3 months smoothly, they won't be able to do much. This place is thousands of miles away from the church's lair. The bishop will bring a large army of judges across the entire Grey Castle to crusade against me. My father will never allow such a thing to happen. This is a serious provocation to the dignity of the royal family." When Nightingale left, Roland lay down on his bed and let out a long sigh. There were some things he didn't say. The church was thousands of miles away. According to the speed of the spread of news in this world, he was afraid that they would only react after the end of spring. Coupled with the long distance and his identity as a prince, the biggest possibility was that they would send an envoy to investigate the situation. In this way, he was afraid that the return trip would take half a year. By that time, he should already have the strength to break off relations with them. Therefore, the biggest hidden danger wasn't the church, but the witches themselves. This was something only Roland could see. Although the witches were at a disadvantage, this situation wouldn't last forever. Witches didn't rely on bloodline inheritance, but awakened randomly without any rules, which meant that witches couldn't be exterminated, they would only increase in number. The church relied on the god's stone of retaliation to maintain an advantage over the witches, but this advantage could only be used to counteract magic. At present, the witches' awakening not only gave them a variety of abilities, but even their physical fitness, thinking, reaction, and even their appearance had a tendency to surpass ordinary people. In essence, they could already be regarded as new humans. The more cruel the oppression, the more intense the resistance. When a pure witch-led riot was set off, how much damage would it cause to Grey Castle? The hatred born from the church, once it couldn't be controlled, it was very likely to turn into an indiscriminate hatred of all the people of the kingdom. Roland didn't want to see that happen. Therefore, he needed to start from Border Town, to construct a structure that could accommodate both of them, and then spread it to the whole of Grey Castle and even the mainland kingdom. Chapter 45. When the moon began to sink, Gerald Wimbledon saw the looming outline of the walls of the king's city in the night. After a few months, I'm finally back, he thought. The fatigue from the long journey suddenly disappeared a lot, but he still remained vigilant. He reined in his horse and signaled his deputy to go forward and inquire about the situation. If the plan hadn't changed, Scholar Ong should have replaced the guards with his own men. After his deputy gave the signal, he lowered the drawbridge. He stared at the front with wide eyes, for fear that he would miss the faint light. The waiting time was not long, but Gerald felt as if time had frozen. When his eyelids were sore and he could not hold on any longer, he finally saw flashes coming from afar. 2 flashes below the city wall, 3 flashes above, just as the plan had agreed. He breathed a sigh of relief and waved to his men to move forward. In this way, he was only 1 step away from the throne. Gerald rode through the side gate of the city wall, and his deputy walked side by side with him. Behind him were more than 20 cavalrymen. All of them were silent, pulling the reins and controlling their mounts to move forward slowly. The material of the walls of the Grey Castle Kingdom was taken from the fallen dragon ridge. This grayish-brown stone gave off a dark red luster under the torch, as if it had been soaked in blood. The entire wall was 20 feet wide. In order to build this wall, more than 1,000 laborers, slaves, and stonemasons died on the construction site. Even an army of 10,000 soldiers could not break through the wall, but now he could easily cross it. Gerald thought that any loophole would start from the inside. For some reason, he thought of the new holy city. Would the seemingly more magnificent and indestructible walls be breached from the inside? Your Royal Highness, I have been waiting for you here for a long time. After passing through the city gate, Scholar Ong and his team were waiting at the gate. Seeing Gerald appear, the scholar quickly dismounted from his horse and bowed in salute. Gerald put aside the distracting thoughts, probably because he was too excited and couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. You did a good job. Have the guards of the palace been changed? Your Royal Highness, there was an accident in the plan. The Silver Hand Knight, who was originally willing to serve you, was transferred to the Southern Territory 3 days ago. Now we only have time to change the guards of the palace. Gerald frowned. This meant that it was impossible for him to bring more than 20 people into the palace. The guards wouldn't stop him, but they wouldn't allow so many fully armed people to enter the royal family's territory. Forget it. As long as 2 people from the team in the bedroom follow me and the rest guard the door and don't let anyone come in and disturb me, it'll be fine. He hesitated for a moment and then made up his mind. Although the plan had changed, the situation was still under control. His father's personal guards would usually stay outside for the night. As long as someone could stall them for a moment, he was confident that he could cut them down with his sword. After entering the inner city, everything seemed to have returned to how it was when he left. Even though it was nighttime, he could still recognize every street. This was his territory, there was no doubt about it. Everyone jumped off their horses and quickly walked towards the palace. When they arrived at the gate, more than 20 people spread out according to the new plan and hid outside the palace. As Angor had said, although the guards were surprised that the prince had returned to the capital at night, when Gerald said that he had something important to do, they directly opened the door and let him in. After all, he was the eldest son of the king of Grey Castle and legally the first heir to the throne. The prince and Angor passed through the garden and the main hall. Ahead of them was the castle where Wimbledon III lived. The scholar raised the torch in his hand and shook it left and right. Immediately, a guard came out of the darkness and knelt down on one knee. Your Royal Highness, please come with me. Gerald sniffed. He smelled blood. Didn't they say that all the guards in the bedroom had been replaced? He looked at the guard by the light of the fire. It was indeed someone he was familiar with, a knight who supported him to the throne. This made him feel a little relieved. Why, did someone enter the castle? Your Royal Highness, His Majesty summoned a maid in the evening. When she came out, she saw our change, the other replied. Please rest assured we have taken care of it. His father hadn't touched a woman for a long time, since his mother's death. Gerald was a little surprised, but now was not the time to worry about such trivial things. He nodded and said nothing more. He followed the guard into the castle, and the others followed. For Gerald, He could walk from the beginning to the end of the castle with his eyes closed. He had lived here for more than 20 years, so he knew where the secret passage and the secret door were. However, the purpose of his trip was to persuade his father to pass the throne to him. It was meaningless to sneak into the bedroom. He had to get rid of the guards stationed outside and let his father thoroughly understand his situation. Only then could he sit down and seriously discuss the ownership of the inheritance. If he couldn't convince him, Gerald Wimbledon took a deep breath and motioned for everyone to stop. He pulled out the two-handed sword from his back. The bronze door at the end of the corridor was the only entrance to the bedroom. Behind the door was the outer room, which was also the last line of defense in front of the bedroom. There were usually 2 or 3 guards stationed there. In case of an accident, they could rush into the bedroom to protect His Majesty. Gerald first pushed the door open a small gap, then with a sidestep, he quickly rushed into the room and raised his sword in a fighting posture, but the outer room was quiet and there was no one there. At the same time, a strong smell of blood assailed his nostrils. An ominous premonition flashed in his heart, and he ran directly to the bedroom. Then, Gerald saw an unbelievable scene. Wimbledon III was sitting on the bed in his nightgown, his upper body leaning on the pillow cushion. His robe was open, and a sword hilt was stuck in his chest. Blood flowed down his bulging belly and soaked the quilt. Standing next to his father was his younger brother, Timothy Wimbledon. How could this be? Gerald was stunned. Just like you, brother, Timothy sighed. I didn't want to do this. He clapped his hands, and a group of armored warriors quickly rushed in from behind the door and surrounded the eldest prince. This is a chess game and I wanted to play it according to the rules. Brother, do you know? My sister didn't intend to play this game from the beginning, and of course, you didn't either. Otherwise, why would you hear Scholar Aang's astrological prediction and come all the way to King's City? To tell you the truth, if you didn't come, I would really be helpless. Scholar. He gritted his teeth and looked back. Scholar Aang took a step back and spread out his hands. I didn't lie to you. The apocalypse star is moving away from the blazing sun means that the seeker has deviated from the right path, but it also means that the star has fallen. Gerald now fully understood that from the very beginning he had fallen into a well-designed trap. The smell of blood at the castle gate was probably not left by a maid, and the reason why the Silver Hand Knight was transferred was also the same. But what made him most desperate was that Scholar Aang, who had taken care of him for more than 10 years and taught him to read and write since he was a child, finally chose the second prince, just like his father. Timothy Wimbledon. You are both his sons, but he poured so much effort into you and gave you the best territory. I didn't expect you to be the first to bite him. You are simply a devil from hell. Chapter 46. Gerald knew that he had no way out. The only thing he could do was to drag his younger brother to hell with him. At this moment he actually calmed down. Did you trick me here just to get rid of me? Get rid of you? No, that won't help me, my dear brother. I did it because I had no other choice. Timothy's tone was still calm, as if he was stating a fact. If I had waited for 5 years, I'm afraid I would have to face my third sister's pirate army. Do you know what she has been doing recently? Gerald shook his head and estimated the distance between himself and the second prince. He remembered that his younger brother had been very smart since childhood, but he was not good at riding, shooting, or fighting. As long as he could seize the opportunity to rush over and chop, she is building her own army, brother. To tell you the truth, I admire her. She actually took this step long before the fight for the throne. Even I did not expect this. We got along so well when we were young, so why did we end up like this? Why must we kill each other? He said and took 2 steps back. For example, I'm afraid you want to cut me in half with your sword, right? I know, brother. You are still the same as before. When you want to kill, your eyes will become terrible. Timothy sighed. I will tell you bluntly, I want to stop the fight for the throne. Otherwise, in 5 years, I will be waiting for Garcia's fleet. She controlled the port of Clearwater a few years ago, and Valencia is suitable for producing merchants, but not suitable for training soldiers. I need an army, enough to resist my third sister's fleet. This is not something that can be achieved by relying on a trading city. Gerald Wimbledon, Tomorrow you will be tried for leaving your territory and assassinating the king. I have to return to Valencia tonight and prepare before the news of my father's death reaches the eastern region. I will express my deep sorrow, and as the second in line, I will be crowned king. And you will be sent to the guillotine for the crime of killing the king. You! Galan shouted and rushed towards his brother, but the distance was too far. His big sword was intercepted by 2 iron guards at the same time. Then his calf went numb, and a short sword pierced through his calf. Galan suddenly lost his balance and fell to the ground. Everyone rushed forward and pinned him to the ground, binding him until he could not move. Trial? You think you have the right to judge me? I will tell you everything and let those who support you know what kind of monster you are. Of course you won't, brother, Timothy said patiently. The alchemy workshop has a medicine called forgetting words. It is a mixture of lizard venom from the southern desert and horse's milk. After drinking it, you won't be able to make any sound. Don't worry, it won't cause you any pain. Instead, it's mellow and intoxicating. If you really want to blame someone, then blame our genius little sister. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have taken this step. He waved at the head of the guards, who nodded and saluted, then dragged the eldest prince out of the palace. The other iron guards also filed out, and finally only the second prince and Scholar Ong were left. Your Royal Highness, the throne is already in your pocket. I should also address you as Your Majesty, Scholar Ong said while bowing. You did a good job. When I sit on the throne of Grey Castle, I will fulfill our agreement. But, seeing my brother's miserable appearance today, I think some agreements should be added with a guarantee clause. The scholar's expression immediately changed. Your Royal Highness, you mean? Rest assured, I just don't want to be betrayed. Timothy took out a wax pill from his bosom. I think you have seen this thing many times. It takes 7 days for the wax pill's outer shell to completely dissolve, which is almost the time it takes for me to return between King City and Valencia. I used the price of the kingdom's chief astrologer to win you over, and I don't want anyone else to offer a higher price to take you away. Your Royal Highness, you must be joking. The scholar's face turned pale. He clenched his teeth and finally swallowed the wax pill. Smart choice, Timothy nodded with satisfaction. You can go now. When there was no one in the bedroom, the second prince's face became gloomy. He grabbed the porcelain placed on the low table beside the bed and fiercely smashed it on the ground, breaking it into pieces. A guard immediately came in from outside. Your Royal Highness? Get out, he roared. Yes, the guard quickly bowed his head and left the room, closing the door. Damn, it shouldn't have been like this. His plan didn't include killing his father. With the favor of Wimbledon 3, he only needed to lead the other side to notice Garcia's actions and stop her, and the pawn in his hand was the eldest prince, Gerald Wimbledon. Timothy thought his plan was impeccable. He used the position of chief astrologer to lure Gerald's first mentor, Scholar Ong, who did not have a high position in the Astrology Association, to write a letter for himself to the eldest prince. And the eldest prince quickly took the bait. This was also in line with Timothy's judgment. His brother was good at fighting but not good at thinking, and at the same time he was not willing to give up the throne. The next few letters gradually provoked the eldest prince's ambition, and Timothy also prepared for the next step. When the last letter with the astrological prediction was sent, he secretly returned to King City and revealed the news that the eldest prince might force the palace to abdicate to his father. There was no doubt that once this matter was confirmed, his father would fly into a rage and throw the eldest prince into prison, either until death or exile. Then, his father would turn his attention to his other children, and Garcia, who was wantonly developing the army, would inevitably become the second nail in his father's eyes. But why did it become like this? After hearing the news, his father actually showed a strange smile, pulled out his dagger, and directly stabbed himself in the chest. Everything happened so fast that Timothy had no time to stop it, and could only watch his father die. He slowly sat down beside the bed, and for the first time had the illusion that he was also a pawn in the dark. His father's last smile was like a nightmare, making his hair stand on end. He thought about the whole thing over and over again, including examining the body, but still couldn't find a clue. Why did his father do that? He also suspected that this man was pretending, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find any flaws. Even the hidden wound on his back was consistent with the appearance in his memory. Seeing that Gerald was about to arrive at King City, he had to pretend to be calm and completely change the plan. He would push the death of Wimbledon III to the eldest prince, and then use his identity as the second in line to ascend the throne in advance. As long as he could successfully be crowned, he would no longer be restricted by the territory and could directly mobilize the power of the Duke of the Southern Territory to threaten Garcia, forcing her to give up the port of Clearwater. It seemed that the result would not be much different, but Timothy felt deeply uneasy, as if an invisible hand had unknowingly inserted itself into the struggle of the upper echelons of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, and he was completely unaware of it. Meanwhile, Anna continued to manufacture other metal parts in the castle's backyard. Needless to say, with Anna around, metal processing became as easy as kneading mud, especially after she mastered the control of flames. Now, she used her hands to mold the rough shape of the small pieces. Roland couldn't help but sigh as he watched the other party melt the iron ingot into a viscous liquid and knead it back and forth. If there were no witches, these plans in his mind might have been delayed for more than 10 years. 2 days later, the first milling machine appeared in the backyard. During this time, Roland didn't stay idle. Drawing gears could be regarded as his old profession. He designed a set of gears to be used to adjust the speed and stabilize the output of the steam engine. The corresponding tooth discs were already out of the mold, and after the milling machine was assembled, the grinding process could be carried out. Gears weren't something new. Most of the world's mines relied on animals to pull wooden gears and a capstan mechanism to drain water. This time, the chief knight finally felt satisfied. After running around for His Royal Highness so many times, he could finally understand what the other was planning to do. Roland also asked him to bring 3 blacksmiths and their respective apprentices to learn how to use the milling machine in the yard. It was impossible for him to personally operate these machines every day, so it was necessary to train a group of professional workers. After everyone respectfully saluted him, Roland began to demonstrate how to use the milling machine to process gears. He didn't mind playing the role of a senior fitter in front of everyone. In fact, in this era, there were all kinds of princes, and they all had a variety of hobbies. In addition, he had a reputation of being irresponsible, so operating the machine was no pressure at all. The chief knight was responsible for helping him pour the warm lard. In this era without oil lubrication, using lard as a substitute was a bit wasteful, but it was better than nothing. The lard poured over the millstone and fell into the porcelain basin below, which could be used repeatedly. Roland first carved the tooth discs according to the designed angle, then erected the tooth discs and fixed them on the workbench. Then he pulled the millstone to the top of the tooth discs, aimed at the engraved lines, and stepped on the pedal. The pedal drove the wooden wheel, and through the belt, the power was transmitted to the rotating shaft of the millstone. Then he used his hand to stabilize the millstone's handle and gently pulled it down. The rotating millstone slowly cut into the tooth discs at a 90-degree angle. Because the material of the tooth discs was pig iron and the millstone was quenched steel, it wasn't very difficult to cut out the tooth marks. The scene was filled with the fragrance of lard, which made the blacksmiths and apprentices, who hadn't tasted meat for a long time, swallow their saliva. After the demonstration, it was time to sign the contract. Border Town's commerce was still in its infancy, and there was no industry to speak of. Whether it was the steam engine or the machine tool, it was impossible to have a situation where the shops would immediately scramble to buy them. In this era, most people didn't realize the great significance of these things, as well as the potential commercial value. So Roland could only take the initiative to promote the use of machinery. He stipulated in the contract that the blacksmith shop using the milling machine had to process at least 1 set of gears a week. The required materials would be provided by the castle, and the processing fee would be 10 silver royals. At the same time, the blacksmith shop had to pay 2 silver royals for the use of the machine every week. Because this set of machine tools wasn't given to the blacksmith shop for free, it was more like a loan. After entering the months of the demons, the blacksmith shop's business had declined a lot. At this time, there was an opportunity to make money, and it was an order personally given by His Royal Highness, so naturally no one had any objections. At the same time, Roland told them that this was only the first milling machine, and that there would be several more in the future, and if they were interested, they could apply to the city hall. Your Royal Highness, why didn't you directly write on the contract that the processing fee would be 8 silver royals? After the blacksmiths left, Carter asked puzzledly. Although the two numbers are the same, the meaning is not the same, Roland explained. This is probably the first commercial rental contract in Border Town, so I need to establish an industry standard. The chief knight wiped his forehead. His Royal Highness the Fourth Prince seemed to be talking nonsense again, but he already had experience with this, so as long as he pretended to listen carefully, His Royal Highness would continue to explain. Chapter 48. Just as Roland was in high spirits and was ready to talk about how to establish a reasonable market, the sound of a horn came from afar. Only when the patrol members couldn't cope with the situation would they sound the alarm. Roland and Carter looked at each other and immediately walked out of the castle's backyard. The guards had already prepared the horses, so Roland mounted the horse and rode towards the direction of the city wall with Carter and his men. When they climbed up the wall, the militia was already in position, and there was a row of spears on the wall. This made Roland feel a little relieved. The eggs were not in vain. He looked to the northwest and saw a group of black figures approaching Border Town. The prince estimated the number and found that there were about 20 of them. Iron Axe trotted from his defensive position, saluted and reported, "Your Highness, this group of demonic beasts is a bit strange." "Strange? Do you mean that they generally don't act in groups?" "That's not it," Iron Axe explained. "If they were herd animals before they fell, then after becoming demonic beasts they would still maintain this habit, for example, the wolf species. But this group of demonic beasts is not the same species, so they shouldn't act in groups. There were hunters who observed them killing each other before. Demonic beasts themselves were mutated beasts, so they mostly maintained the original style of beasts, but at the same time their desire to prey was stronger. In a sense, the intelligence of demonic beasts was lower than that of beasts, because their manic temperament made them forget the principle of seeking benefits and avoiding harm. Roland carefully observed for a moment and found that there were large and small beasts in the group. At least he could distinguish the existence of the wolf species and the bison species. But this couldn't be taken as evidence that they suddenly had wisdom and knew the importance of grouping. Because they were still guided by the obstacles and traps set by Iron Axe, they gradually gathered in front of the city wall. Van felt his palms were wet, and his grip on the spear was a little slippery. While no one was paying attention, he secretly wiped his sweat on his clothes. The hunter responsible for observing repeatedly said the same words, "Relax, take a deep breath." Van did it countless times, but still couldn't stop his accelerated heartbeat. He had lived in the western region for more than 10 years, and what he had heard the most were the ferocious and cruel deeds of the demonic beasts. Since the beginning of the months of the demons, the sight of a few scattered demonic beasts being shot down by the hunters under the city wall had eased his fear of the demonic beasts. He had thought that he was a brave man who had been through many battles, but today, facing so many monsters for the first time, he still felt his legs trembling. Thinking that he had been chosen by His Royal Highness to be the vice-captain of the Lancers, Van tried to pretend to be calm and kept his spear in a defensive posture. The group of monsters was getting closer and closer. He could already make out their shapes. The one at the front was a bison. The two black horns on its head were as thick as his arm. The fur on his back was like a cloak that covered his entire body. When it was only 30 feet away from the city wall, Vanner felt as if the ground was shaking. He licked his dry lips and waited for the hunter to give the order to stab. Then there was a loud noise. The speed of the demonic beast didn't slow down at all, and it directly hit the city wall. Its head was immediately smashed, and black blood splashed all over the wall. Before Vanner had time to breathe a sigh of relief, the two wolves that were following closely behind the bison had already pounced on him. Stab! Hearing the roar of the hunter, Vanner subconsciously thrust out his spear, even though the direction of the wolves was not towards him. This time, the effect of the joint attack was obviously not as good as during the training. The row of spears on the top of the wall stabbed out one after another. Some people had already thrust their spears when they saw the wolves jump, while others had not reacted for a long time after hearing the shout. As a result, only one of the wolves was forced to retreat, while the other one jumped out of the gap between the spears and landed on the top of the wall. "Maintain the formation," the hunter roared. Although Vanna wanted to turn his head to see which direction the demonic beast would attack, the warning that Iron Axe had repeatedly emphasized during the training was effective. When the attention was attracted by the movement behind, the front would become the most dangerous area. His eyes were fixed on the incoming group of demonic beasts, and he tightly grasped the spear in his hand. Obviously, the hunter team was much more experienced than the spear team. Before the wolves fell to the ground, the hunters had already unsheathed their scimitars. Iron Axe was even more agile. He directly strode to the front of the demonic beast, lifted the butt of his spear, and smashed it into the waist of the demonic beast, causing it to roll several times in the air. After the mutation, both the physical strength and the defense of the demonic beast had been greatly improved, so such an attack would obviously not cause too much damage to it. After it fell to the ground, it immediately turned over and stood up, revealing its sharp fangs. Unfortunately, Iron Axe's muzzle was already pressed against its head. A gunshot sounded, the skull of the demonic beast flew up, and its body, which had lost its brain, retreated 2 steps, twitched, and collapsed to the ground. "This beast is already dead. Continue to guard your positions." "My stomach," someone screamed. Vanner glanced at the direction of the voice and saw a team member leaning against the wall, tightly covering his stomach, and his hands were already stained with blood. "His intestines are flowing out." It was the claws of the wolf when it rushed up. "Help me, damn it, get a piece of cloth to tie it up." The scene was chaotic. Fortunately, the next few demonic beasts that rushed to the bottom of the wall were wild boars. Although their skin was rough and their flesh was thick, at such a close distance, they were shot into hedgehogs by the crossbows of the hunters. "Everyone, don't panic." Roland, who had been stopped by Nightingale, had just arrived and shouted, "Have you all forgotten what to do when someone is injured during training? Do it according to the regulations." The prince's words instantly awakened Vanner. He remembered his duty. As the deputy of the defense team of this section of the wall, he should organize rescue when someone was injured. He called out the names of 2 of his teammates. "You carry him to the hospital, hurry up." According to his previous experience, it was basically impossible for this person to survive, but His Royal Highness had said that it was one thing to do it or not, and another thing to succeed or not. As a member of the militia, he must prioritize the execution of orders and regulations. When the wounded were carried away, order was finally restored on the wall. This wave of demonic beasts seemed to be numerous, but only a few could pose a threat to the people on the wall. The hunter team shot the rest of the demonic beasts one by one, and Vanner was relieved. The whole battle had only lasted for half an hour, but he felt that he had exhausted all his strength. At this moment, the hunter who was responsible for guarding on the watchtower of the wall shouted again, "My God, what is that?" Vanner also saw the target. Although it was still a long distance from the wall, just from the outline, he could tell that it must be a huge monster. Vanner swore that even 10 cows stacked together could not compare to the monster in front of him. Only the experienced Iron Axe immediately recognized the monster. Chapter 49. P.S. Here is today's update, and by the way, pull votes for the Chidian 515 Fan Festival. Everyone has 8 votes, and the votes will be rewarded with coins. I beg for your support and appreciation. Roland rubbed his eyes. What the hell is this? If the mutation of demonic beasts was still within the scope of biology, it was barely understandable, but the monster in front of him was obviously as absurd as in a horror movie. From afar, it looked like a giant tortoise with 2 heads, but when he got closer, he found that it was actually 2 wolf heads. Is this a Frankenstein experiment? Roland thought. The giant demonic beast was almost as tall as the city wall, about 6 meters long, and had a total of 6 feet, shaped like a rhinoceros leg, short and thick. However, the size of 1 foot was equivalent to an adult's torso. As for the head, the 2 wolf heads were not like the 2-headed monsters commonly seen in movies, which took turns to raise their heads and roar, or bite each other, showing that no one was willing to submit to the other. They just hung their heads low, their eyes lifeless, and moved forward slowly like walking corpses. The most eye-catching thing was probably the carapace on the back of the demonic beast. The gray surface was dull, covered with algae, and looked extraordinarily hard. It was like a tortoise shell, covering from head to tail. If this monster could also retract into the shell like a tortoise, it would be really difficult to kill. However, Roland was not worried. Such a slow demonic beast was destined to be a target. Even if the gun could not penetrate the carapace, it could always burst the exposed wolf head. If it retracted into the shell, then he would directly blow it up with explosives. "Your Highness, this is a hybrid." Iron Axe came over nervously. "I probably understand why there are different kinds of demonic beasts moving in groups. They must have been driven here by this hybrid. Like a lion driving a flock of sheep?" Roland nodded. "This is very different from the one you met last time. This is also the first time I have seen this type of hybrid. Although it looks clumsy, you must not be careless. As long as it is a hybrid, I am afraid it will not be easy to deal with." "It is about to enter the shooting range," Roland said. "Try with the bow and arrow first." At this time, there was light snow falling from the sky, and at the same time, the northwest wind was blowing erratically. The weather was not suitable for archery. However, the two hunters selected by Iron Axe looked very confident. They ascended the watchtower, determined the direction of the instantaneous wind, and shot arrows into the air. These two sharp arrows seemed to have grown eyes. After rising to the highest point, under the influence of wind and gravity, they landed on the target's carapace at an almost vertical angle. Just as he had expected, the arrow bounced off. Roland even heard the sound of a ricochet in his head. The two of them did not panic and continued to knock their arrows. Very quickly, they shot out 2 more volleys of arrows. The last volley of arrows was effective. They all landed in front of the monster. One of the arrows accurately landed on the wolf's head, and the other stabbed into the target's neck. However, the other party did not roar angrily or accelerate. It only paused for a moment, then retracted its head and legs into the shell and continued to move forward slowly. This change left everyone dumbfounded. At this moment, the demonic beast looked like a tank that had lowered its position. The lower edge of its carapace was almost touching the ground as it moved forward. In this way, even the best archer would not be able to shoot an arrow into its body. "Load the guns," Roland ordered. Now that the target was only 50 feet away from the wall, even if it was a flintlock without any rifling, they did not have to worry about missing. Carter, Iron Axe and the others immediately approached the wall, put the barrels on top of the wall, aimed, and fired. A burst of white smoke floated through the air. Roland could clearly see the bullet hit the carapace, and a small piece of the carapace broke open. The hybrid was not affected at all and still maintained its original speed. It seems that the strength of this layer of armor is still in the category of carbon-based creatures, he thought. Unfortunately, the lead pellets are too soft and easily deformed, so they are not suitable for penetrating thick armor. It is not realistic to rely on these 4 guns to break the carapace of the hybrid, so the only way is to use explosives. Iron Axe's judgment was the same as the prince's. He immediately called out the deputy of the Lancer squad and ordered him to carry the explosives. At this time, the demonic beast was already on top of the wall. When it felt that it could no longer move forward, its carapace began to shake rapidly and repeatedly hit the wall like an electric hammer. Suddenly, stone chips splashed and several cracks quickly spread along the cement. The rubble wall had a strong ability to resist pressure, but its tensile and shear properties were extremely poor. In other words, its ability to resist vibration was almost zero. The people standing on top of the wall felt a strong vibration. Soon, an ear-piercing sound of friction reached everyone's ears. The hybrid's carapace had already cut a hole in the wall. But the collision did not stop. It began to move again, embedding its entire body into the wall. The militiamen fled from the wall that was already full of cracks. Roland was carried by the invisible nightingale and jumped directly from the top of the wall. If someone was watching the prince at this time, they would find that when he landed, his feet were hanging in the air, just like a ghost. When Vanner carefully arrived with a bag of explosives, he was surprised to find that the middle of the wall had been smashed open nearly 9 feet wide. The demonic beast that had crossed the wall had stopped shaking and was still moving forward slowly at the same speed. "Hurry up!" Iron Axe shouted. "Ignite it and put it under the beast's feet." Although Vanner's hands were trembling, his mind was unexpectedly clear. Every detail of how to operate the explosives during training appeared in front of his eyes. Different from the experimental product, the official product had reduced the amount of explosives and was sealed by wooden planks. Waste or fragments were filled between the explosives and the planks. At the same time, the ignition design was optimized by using the pull-out method of flint and copper wire. If it failed, there was still a normal ignition fuse at the end of the explosives. He hastily tore off the outermost part of the oil-soaked cloth, fastened the exposed bend of the copper wire, and pulled it with all his strength. There was a rapid sizzling sound from the wooden box, and then there was a cloud of smoke, a sign that the ignition was successful. This fuse, which had been soaked in salt, burned slowly. It took about 10 breaths of time. Vanner saw the white smoke coming out of the box, and the surrounding world seemed to quiet down. He had seen the power of this thing. If it exploded in his hands, he was afraid that not even a piece of his body would be left. 9 breaths. Vanner listened to his own heartbeat and silently counted down. He walked step by step to the front of the demonic beast and put the explosives on its path. 5 breaths. Then it just pressed forward, and nothing could stop it. 3 breaths. Vanner turned around and ran. 2 breaths. 1 breath. Hearing a muffled sound, Vanner felt the ground under his feet shake violently, and the world became noisy again. He turned his head and saw a white air wave rushing out from under the carapace. It was the snow brought up by the explosion of the explosives. At first glance, it looked very much like a cloud of scattered mist. The demonic beast finally stopped moving, as if it could no longer bear the weight on its back. Its huge armor crashed to the ground. Then black blood surged out from under the carapace and soaked the ground around it. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" The crowd suddenly burst into cheers. Vanner sat on the ground. Only now did he realize that his clothes had been soaked in cold sweat. It was finally over. When everyone thought so, the high-pitched buzzing of the horn resounded through the border again. Another wave of demonic beasts emerged from the horizon and rushed towards this border town. Chapter 50. P.S. I present today's update, and by the way, poll votes for the Chidian 515 Fan Festival. Everyone has 8 votes, and the votes will be rewarded with coins. I beg for everyone's support and appreciation. Are you feeling better? Anna patted Nana's back. She also felt like something was churning in her stomach, but in the end she endured it. When the wounded was carried up, he was still conscious. He kept repeating, "Save me, save me." The despair and pleading in his eyes made people feel sad. Seeing the intestines hanging outside his stomach, Nana directly vomited them out. Even so, she insisted on finishing the treatment. After Brian helped put the intestines back into the wounded stomach, Nana stretched out her hand and closed her eyes to heal the other's wound. The little girl looked a little dispirited. She leaned against Anna and whispered, "Today is the first time I heard the horn sound. Is His Highness in trouble?" "I don't know," Anna shook her head. She wanted to go to the city wall to have a look, but she was afraid that she would cause trouble for Roland. She was a little envious of Nightingale. Her ability to move silently was really convenient. At this moment, a muffled sound came from the direction of the city wall. Everyone felt a slight vibration. Brian stood up and paced around the room anxiously. "Take it easy, young man," Baron Pine said while wiping his sword. "Losing your cool before entering the battlefield will only make a bad result worse. Besides, it's far from the worst." "I'm sorry, Your Excellency," Brian replied. "I just feel uneasy when I think of people fighting desperately on the city wall while I'm wasting time here. It is my duty to guard this town." "Perhaps," Pine shrugged. "But guarding the town is not your duty alone. I heard that His Highness will confer you the title of Knight after winter, so you should understand that the first principle of a knight is loyalty. Since he needs you to protect Anna, you should fulfill your responsibility." "All right." Brian hesitated for a moment and sat back in his seat. But soon, they heard the second horn sound. It was more urgent than the first, like thunder rolling through everyone's heart. Pine furrowed his brow. Anna! Nana exclaimed. He turned his head and saw that the witch was heading straight for the door. Brian immediately chased after her and blocked her way. Didn't you say you wanted to guard the city wall? Now is the time, Anna said calmly. As long as you come with me, you won't be going against His Highness's orders. As expected, Brian was stunned. He raised his head and looked at Pine. What an amazing girl, Baron thought. At least there was nothing wrong with this sentence. Because His Royal Highness did not stipulate that she must stay in the infirmary. And according to Nana, she can summon fire. If the current situation was really critical, the addition of a witch might play a role in reversing the situation. Thinking of this, he nodded. Protect her. Brian immediately became spirited and replied loudly. Seeing the two of them leave, Nana asked, Father, aren't you going? My battlefield is here, my good daughter, Baron smiled. Whether it's demonic beasts or devils, I won't let them hurt you. Not far from the infirmary was the city wall. Anna and Brian trotted along the stone road along the wall toward the east. When they arrived at the central watchtower, they found that the situation had become very bad. There was a huge gap in the city wall. Roland's personal guards were holding their shields, but there were still several people who were thrown to the ground. Especially a wild boar-like demonic beast with long teeth. When it rushed forward, it was simply unstoppable. The guards standing in front of it were almost knocked away along with their shields. Hey, it's dangerous here, you should leave quickly. Someone saw Anna dressed in a strange outfit and tried to dissuade her. Anna turned a deaf ear and went straight to the gap. After the demonic beast rushed out of the crowd, it changed its direction and directly rushed towards Anna. Brian, who was acting as a guard, quickly stepped forward and took the side. He lowered his body and swung his sword horizontally. The mad demonic beast had no intention of dodging. Its front legs hit the blade of the sword, and the sword was instantly knocked away. At the same time, the momentum of its body also broke the broken leg bone. It screamed and fell to the ground, struggling like a dehydrated fish. For a while, no one dared to approach. Anna went to the side of the demonic beast and pressed her hands on the ground. Flames suddenly sprang up from under the demonic beast's body, and soon it was roasted into a ball of charcoal. Roland also noticed the sudden rise of the flame. When he found out that Anna was personally going into battle, he was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. This was not in his plan. He originally intended to let Anna gain the favor of the militia, and when most people accepted the witches, he would make the existence of Anna public. But now it was too late. He immediately turned his head and said, Don't worry about me, you go and protect her. Anna absolutely could not be lost. As an important person in the development of industrial technology, if she was injured it would bring immeasurable losses. I know, Nightingale said, please pay attention to your safety. Anna walked to the front of the broken wall. Most of the guards of Roland had seen this strangely dressed girl, so they all gave way to her. She stood in the middle of the shield wall and stretched out her arms to both sides. The flames, like vines, gushed out from her palms and climbed up along the broken wall. All the people who witnessed this marvelous scene had their mouths wide open. They could not believe that a wall of flames was slowly rising and filling the gap in the wall. This was not an illusion. The high temperature brought by the flames made the guards at the broken wall retreat. The surrounding snow quickly melted and formed a white mist. The demonic beasts also felt the burning heat of the wall of flames. They all fled to both sides. Occasionally one or two would rush into the wall of flames, but they only ran 2 steps before they were buried in the sea of flames. Everyone, go to the wall. Roland took the opportunity to shout, Lancers, regroup. Hunter team, shoot freely. Then he grabbed Carter's gun, climbed to the top of the wall, and personally shot at the demonic beasts who had nowhere to go. The prince's action immediately inspired everyone present. It had to be said that in this era, there were very few nobles or the royal family who took the lead. As the 4th prince of the kingdom, Roland was willing to fight together with the militia selected from the civilians, which brought a huge morale boost. The crowd shouted, Defend Border Town. Fight for His Royal Highness the Prince. and maintained the defensive line formation as it was before the wall was broken. The battle continued until the sky was getting dark. Finally, there were no demonic beasts left in front of the wall. The light of the flames gradually dissipated. Anna wiped the sweat from her forehead and walked out of the broken wall. Then, Roland saw an incredible scene. The guards clenched their fists and bowed their heads to her. Then the militia seemed to be infected. No one shouted the words demon or witch. Instead, they silently watched her. After the war, there was a short period of peace on the border. A power that had never been seen before was indeed terrible. But when this power stood on their side and fought against the evil enemy, the fear would gradually disappear and be replaced by trust and gratitude. Roland suppressed the excitement in his heart and walked in front of Anna. He found that her face was pale, her steps were unsteady, and her body was on the verge of collapsing. "Are you all right?" He worriedly held the girl's shoulders. She reluctantly smiled at the prince and then fell into his arms. Chapter 51. Through the narrow high window of the terrace, the afterglow of the setting sun shone on the ground, reflecting a dark red stripe on the walls. There were only a few places in the kingdom where you could still see the setting sun, and the port of Clearwater was one of them. According to legend, the months of demons, which was covered in snow and cold wind, had little effect on the port. Except for the Black Sail fleet, which was unable to leave the port, the whole city was as busy as usual. And the owner of this harbor city, Garcia Wimbledon, was sitting in front of the square table under the window, seriously reading the letter in her hand. Her gray hair was dyed with a touch of gold under the setting sun, and the crisscrossing light and shadow of her face set off her angular facial features, giving her a unique charm and full of heroic spirit. Farhan had been standing by her side for some time now. Although the time it took her to read the letter had exceeded the normal time, Ryan still chose to quietly wait. He didn't want to disturb the peace. Finally, Garcia sighed softly and put down the letter. "My father is dead." Ryan was startled. "What?" "My father, Aaron Wimbledon, the king of Grey Castle, is dead." She rarely repeated what she had said. He thought, if he had asked her this question normally, she would have turned a blind eye to it. But she really wasn't joking? The king was dead? Ryan opened his mouth, wanting to comfort her with a few words, but the words that came out turned into a question: how did he die? Fortunately, Garcia didn't care about this. She was the third princess of the kingdom, the lord of the port of Clearwater, and the supreme commander of the Black Sail fleet. She didn't need anyone to comfort her. The letter said that my brother Gerald killed my father and was later captured by the guards. He didn't commit suicide, so he was put on trial by the hand of the king and several other ministers, and was sentenced to be beheaded. "This is not normal," Ryan subconsciously said. "Of course it's not normal," Garcia said with an expressionless face. "My brother, although stupid, is not stupid enough to commit suicide. If no one had guided him, he wouldn't have done such a thing." "Someone framed him? Let me guess." The third princess closed her eyes. "Someone probably set up a detailed plan to tempt him into saying that they were willing to help him ascend the throne. To bring him into the inner court of King City, someone had to make arrangements in advance, including eradicating, exchanging, and bribing. But that was not what Gerald was good at, or rather, he was too lazy to do such trivial things. The rest is simple. The person who set up the plan was deeply trusted by him, but betrayed him in the end." Ryan declined to comment. After all, these were only speculations. The process was not important. The key was the result. He believed that Her Royal Highness also thought so. Sure enough, Garcia opened her eyes and continued, "There are at least 9, if not 10, people like this in the First Prince's camp. They have brute force, but their brains are all muscles. It's normal for them to be fooled by others. It's just that." There was a hint of anger in her tone. "My second brother is too violent." "You mean Timothy Wimbledon did it? Besides him, who else knows Gerald so well? After this incident, who would benefit the most?" Garcia's fingers unconsciously tapped the table. "Even a blind man can see it. However, just based on my father's preference for him, he simply doesn't need to do this." Her Royal Highness is angry, Ryan realized. It was rare to see the third princess reveal such an expression. It seems that although she had always complained that Wimbledon 3 was too biased, but in the end she didn't want her father to end up like this. Ryan could more or less understand this feeling. In a big family, the family head always gave the younger generation such a feeling, a mountain that they wanted to surmount, a mountain that they both feared and hated. If what she said was right, and this matter was really done by the second prince, then his actions could indeed be called brutal. But why did he do this? Because he is afraid of me. Garcia took a deep breath, seemingly controlling her emotions. He is afraid of the Black Sail Fleet. Seeing that Ryan didn't answer, she continued to explain. Timothy has informants in the port of Clearwater. This is not surprising. I also have informants in Valencia and King City. After knowing the existence of the Black Sail Fleet, it was easy to guess what I would do next. Valencia can't raise an army that can fight against the Black Sail Fleet. So he used the stupidest method, using Gerald as bait to get what he wanted. You mean he wants an army? He wants the throne, Garcia said. After Gerald's death, he is the first in line to succeed to the throne. Coupled with the death of my father, I'm afraid he is on his way to King City. As long as he can become Wimbledon 4, he can mobilize his vassals and troops without any territorial restrictions. At this point, she shook her head. However, as I said, as my father's favorite son, he doesn't have to do this. Isn't that bad? Ryan worriedly said. If the second prince is successfully crowned, he will announce the end of the fight for the throne and order you to return to King City? Garcia disdainfully said, this step is too straightforward. Even if my father favors him, it doesn't mean that all the ministers will support him, especially when it comes to the murder of the king. Although Timothy pushed the blame on Gerald, he can only fool the common people of the kingdom. If he wants to fully grasp the power of Grey Castle, I estimate that it will take a long time. So, she looked at Ryan. I have to slightly change my plan. Ryan immediately knelt down on one knee and said, I am willing to serve you. Garcia stood up and walked to the window, with her back facing Ryan. After he ascends the throne, he will inevitably deal with me at the first moment. However, I'm afraid the only means he can use is to order Joey Cole, the Duke of the Southern Territory, to pressure me. And the latter will probably use the excuse that the king has just passed away, and the whole country is in mourning, so it's not appropriate to use troops as an excuse. That old fox has always been unwilling to make a loss. At most, he will gather his vassals and surround the port of Clearwater's border. Princess Garcia paused a little, but these actions will bring us unnecessary trouble, so we will set sail tomorrow. Set sail? Your Highness, do you want to? Eagle City is located in the interior of the kingdom. It is almost an undefended city. Through the tributary of the San Juan River, we can reach Clear Spring Town, and from there, we will only need 1 day to reach Eagle City. After I capture Joey, the whole Southern Territory will be under my control. This is an interesting time difference. When he sits on the throne and wants to order Duke Joey, he will find out that the whole Southern Territory has become my territory. I don't know what kind of expression he will have. But, you also said Wimbledon 3 has just passed away, so, what? Do I still need to shed tears first? Garcia turned around. The setting sun fell into the horizon, covering her whole body with a layer of purple and red gauze. Her face was hidden in the darkness, only her eyes were bursting with a subtle light. Her eyes were as firm as a rock. Ryan thought, even if there is anger, there is regret, there will never be sadness. Sadness is not suitable for a king. No, you don't need to, he said seriously. Garcia nodded with satisfaction. Go, summon all the captains to me. Since Timothy is not willing to wait for 5 years, I will not let him down. After obtaining Eagle City, the whole Southern Territory will be independent. It doesn't matter if all of this is done by Timothy or not, he thought. She can always find a suitable path in the unpredictable situation, and once she decides, she will move forward bravely. This is her charm, and also the reason why he followed her. Chapter 52. Roland knocked on the door, and after hearing Nightingale's response, he pushed the door open and entered the room. The room was covered with thick curtains, and only in the early morning and evening would the window be opened to let in the air. At other times, in order to keep warm and keep out the light, the window would be closed. The only source of light came from the 2 candlesticks at the end of the bed. The candles burned quietly, casting two crisscrossing shadows on the furnishings in the room. He walked to the bed and looked at the woman buried in the soft velvet pillow and bedding. Her eyes were still closed, and he sighed softly. "How is the situation at the border defense line?" Nightingale came forward and handed him a cup of warm water. "Everything is going well." Roland took a sip and handed the cup back to her. "Since that day, we haven't encountered a large group of demonic beasts. After the injured militia members returned, everyone's enthusiasm for battle became somewhat high." "What about the damaged part of the city wall?" Carr used a rolling log to move the shell of the hybrid demonic beast to the broken part, and also used a winch and a wooden frame to hang it up, making it part of the city wall. Roland knew that Nightingale wanted to distract his attention so that he wouldn't be overly worried. But as soon as he stepped into the room, all his consciousness couldn't help but gather on the sleeping woman on the bed. The last time they faced a large-scale invasion of demonic beasts, the biggest contributor was undoubtedly Anna. If she hadn't used flames to seal the gap in the city wall, the consequences would have been unimaginable. However, after she fainted in his arms, she never woke up. "It's already been a week," Roland whispered. "In theory, if a person was in a coma for a week without eating or drinking and without direct external supply of nutrients, such as injections, the body's functions would collapse and the brain would gradually die in shock. But Anna didn't show any signs of weakness or illness. At least, she looked much better than when she first fell. Her cheeks were rosy, her breathing was steady, and when he put his hand on her forehead, he could feel the temperature of an ordinary person. Everything indicated that Anna was in a healthy state, but she couldn't wake up. This is also the first time I've encountered such a situation." Nightingale, who was standing at the side, shook her head. The magic power in her body was depleted in that battle, but now it's almost saturated, and it's even denser than before. "If I'm not wrong, tonight will be her coming-of-age day." "Are you saying that she will become an adult in a coma?" "No, she will die in a coma," Nightingale said bluntly. "The pain she suffers on the day of adulthood must be overcome with willpower. Once she gives up the resistance, the magic backlash will irreversibly destroy the witch's body." Roland moved a chair next to the bed and sat down. "But I remember you saying that when the demon bites the body, no matter how painful it is, the consciousness will always remain awake. Either you get through this hurdle, or you choose to end your life." Indeed, there were some people in the Witch Cooperation Association who wanted to pass the demon's bite by falling into a coma, but it wasn't the day of adulthood, it was just an annual torture. Nightingale hesitated, and then continued. "She relied on alchemy to make herself fall into a coma, but it was meaningless. When the magic backlash came, she instantly woke up, but she also lost the ability to resist." "Doesn't this pain gradually increase?" "No, when the time comes, the pain will come like thunder, but how long it will last varies from person to person. My sister is not strong enough, it's just—" Her voice became lower. Roland understood what she meant. This kind of sentence with an unknown time limit was in itself a kind of torture. Not knowing how long you have endured, not knowing how long you still have to persist. It was like a lonely boat drifting in a turbulent sea. It was easy to give up the desire to survive. In the silence, he felt a hand press on his shoulder. "During the years of wandering, I've seen too many deaths. Witches were treated like livestock, hanged, burned, or tortured to death by the nobles as entertainment props. The witches who were lucky enough to escape could only stay away from the crowd, living a secluded life. They don't know where the holy mountain is, it's just an extravagant hope in their hearts." Nightingale's voice was softer than ever. "But Anna is different. Apart from the Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association, it's the first time I've seen someone care so much about a witch. She is needed, valued, and treated like a normal person. Your Highness, even if Anna can't survive until adulthood, she has already found her own holy mountain." But this was not the ending he hoped for. Roland closed his eyes, recalling the scene when he first met her. Her feet were bare, her clothes were tattered, and she was trapped in a cage, but there was not the slightest fear on her face. Her eyes were like the unpolluted surface of a lake, clear and calm. She was aflame, but not as lively as a flame. The scene rotated, like a horse lantern. "I've satisfied your curiosity, my lord. Can you kill me now? I've never used it to hurt anyone. I just want to stay by His Highness' side, that's all. The demonic bite can't kill me, I will defeat it. Are you dreaming? I'm not going anywhere. Roland suppressed his turbulent thoughts, whispered, I will accompany her until the last moment. Me too, and thank you. After dinner, Nana also came. Hearing that Anna was about to reach adulthood, she also insisted on staying. Roland had to arrange an extra room on the second floor for Sir Pine, who accompanied him, to spend the night. In this way, Roland and the two witches sat around the bed, quietly waiting for midnight. For Nightingale and Nana, they also had to endure the pain of the demonic bite this winter. Fortunately, everyone's awakening day was different, otherwise the three witches would have to suffer the test of life and death at the same time. Roland estimated that he would not be able to pretend to be calm and stay in the room. There was no clock tower in the town. In the candlelight in the room, the passage of time became blurred. The cold wind blew against the window. From time to time they could hear the whistling sound of the air passing through the window. Just when Roland felt a trace of tiredness in his heart, Nightingale suddenly said, It's starting. Only she could see that the magic in Anna's body began to become restless. The green flame became more and more intense. The center part of the incandescent part turned dark. The manic magic gathered in the center. As if it was being pulled by something, it struggled and rolled, but to no avail. Roland could not see these changes, but he also noticed that something was wrong. The flame at the top of the candle swayed, but there was no wind in the room. The light emitted by the flame became darker and darker, as if it was being swallowed by the surrounding shadows, and then the color of the flame changed. The orange-red flame turned into a green flame. He looked at the woman in the bed. Anna was still sleeping. Her face did not change in the slightest, as if all this had nothing to do with her. At this time, the candle was almost completely hidden. It was not that the flame was extinguished, but the green flame was slowly swallowing the orange-red part until the light completely disappeared, and everyone fell into darkness. But soon, the flame was lit again. Only this time, the flame on the candlestick had turned into a pure green. The three of them were reflected in the green light, staring at each other, a little difficult to understand what was going on. At this time, Anna's moan drew the three's attention back to her. She slowly opened her eyes. Anna? Roland was stunned. She woke up? The woman blinked, smiled at him, then stretched out her right hand, opened her palm, and held it in front of the prince. A green flame jumped out of her palm, quietly burning. Chapter 53. The next day after Anna woke up, Nightingale said goodbye to Roland. Although I don't know the reason, I'm afraid she's the first witch to safely pass the day of awakening, said Nightingale excitedly before leaving. After following Roland for a long time, she began to use the word awakenings to describe the transformation of witches. I'll bring my sisters from the Witch Cooperation Association, and I hope you can accept them, just like you accepted Anna. Roland couldn't ask for more. One Anna had surpassed the hot forging process and made the town see the dawn of the industrial age. What would a group of witches mean? Of course, considering the safety issue, he still tried to persuade her to stay, hoping that she would go to the impassable mountain range after the end of the months of the demons. But Nightingale was obviously impatient. This winter, there will be many people who will face this difficulty. If we can tell them the news earlier, maybe there will be fewer people who will leave us. Rest assured, ordinary demonic beasts can't find my whereabouts. Then what about your day of awakening? When is it? Roland finally asked. Nightingale turned over and mounted the horse. At the end of winter and the beginning of spring. She waved her hand, leaving the prince to look at her back. Don't worry about me. In recent years the pain has become less and less painful. Roland fell into deep thought upon hearing the answer. He had also been thinking about the reason why Anna was able to pass the day of awakening so smoothly. After all, Anna later said that she didn't feel any pain, which completely subverted Nightingale's concept. The power of witches comes from the devil. They are evil and unclean, and so on. When she died, her blood evaporated and her skin burned black became the unshakable evidence of the power of the fallen. However, Roland didn't think about this from the beginning. He searched through the memories of the fourth prince, but he didn't find any evidence of the existence of God or the devil in this world. Since the power was not a gift from God, it shouldn't be regarded as a standard to distinguish between good and evil. In fact, even if the gods frequently interfered with the mortal world, it was the believers who first chose their own camp and then were given divine power, not the other way around. According to Nightingale's description, witches were the aggregation of magic power. Could it be that the container itself was damaged because there was no place to release the magic power? Roland felt that the possibility of this was very high. Witches were hostile and suppressed by the majority of people, so they would inevitably choose to hide their abilities and pretend to be a normal person, living in fear. As a result, they rarely had the chance to use their magic before they reached adulthood. Of course, Roland did not think that his castle was a good place. He had asked Anna and learned that she had also experienced unbearable pain before. If there was anything different about this year, it would be that ever since she came to the castle, she had been using this power almost every day. Nightingale's last answer vaguely confirmed his conjecture. The invisibility ability would not attract attention even if it was used frequently. In addition, she had been forced to train this ability, and now she could use it even more freely. That was why the backlash on the day of awakening had little effect on her. After returning to the castle, Roland immediately strengthened Nana's training. If there were no wounded in the line of defense, she would have to treat all kinds of small animals. If he could confirm his conjecture through Nana, it could be said that the significance of the witches would be earth-shaking. The devil's curse would become a gift from the heavens. As long as he could ensure that his territory was open to witches, the witches would continue to gather. In any case, after this wave, everything was back on track. Roland began to step up the production of the steam engine too, and at the same time let Anna familiarize herself with the process of her new ability. In the backyard of the castle, a shed was set up, but this time it was to shelter them from the wind and snow. As an experimental base, he felt that it was safer to build it in his own territory. According to Nightingale, after a witch reached adulthood, her ability would stabilize, and it was possible to produce a new branch of her ability. He had not yet seen Anna's new ability, but the use of flames was completely different from before. No, whether it can be called a flame or not is still a problem. Roland thought, if the previous flame was still within the scope of common sense, then the current dark green flame could not be explained by common sense. He named it Heart Fire. Because it could leave Anna and exist alone, and at the same time, it could change its form under the influence of Anna's will. Just like what she was doing now, a small flame stood 2 meters away from her on the iron plate, slightly swaying back and forth, as if it was greeting her. But Roland knew that it was Anna who was controlling it. In normal times, it could maintain a temperature close to her body temperature. Only when Anna wanted to heat up, would it instantly raise the temperature to a higher point, and its color would change from dark green to dark green. Similarly, it could also change from a small flame to a large cluster of flames, and it could move slowly. Unfortunately, it could not be too far away from Anna. After repeated tests, as long as it was more than 5 meters away, the Heart Fire would disappear. Another feature of the Heart Fire was that Anna could summon multiple flames, but she could barely operate 2 at the same time. Recently, the border could be described as calm. The demonic beasts still appeared outside the city walls, but without the presence of the hybrid species, it was difficult for the demonic beasts to break through. As Roland said, the strong were stronger, the fast were faster, but they were still just beasts. Such a large section of the wall, but they were all led to the middle section, so that the militia with only a few hundred people could handle it. Therefore, in addition to the daily routine inspection, Roland spent a lot of time on construction. He had already marked out a site in the south of the castle, planning to be the witches' residence after they arrived. As the investor of the project, he appointed Carr as the person in charge of building a batch of double-story brick houses. At the same time, he had to consider the aesthetic and reasonable layout, convenient access, fast drainage and other issues, and strive to build a model of the community. He also considered whether to disperse the witches to the new and old city areas and mix with the townspeople, but later he gave up this idea. Although this would help speed up the understanding of the witches, but before the misunderstanding was completely resolved, if there was a problem, the consequences would be very likely to be irreparable. After all, the witches only had a certain influence in the militia. Moreover, Roland could not guarantee that the witches brought by Nightingale would be pure and harmless. Most of them had experienced the pain and suffering of the human world. He was afraid that they could no longer be described as simple. Witches like Anna and Nana would only be a very small part of them. Therefore, centralized living would also be convenient for centralized management, but before they arrived, the relevant regulations must be drawn up. In this regard, Roland had no experience to refer to. After all, he was neither a member of the National Security Bureau's Superpower Office, nor the founder of the Revenge League, who would know how to manage a group of people with special abilities. He had to temporarily set up a basic system in accordance with the general personnel management methods of the enterprise, and then slowly feel the stones to cross the river. Of course, Roland knew that this plan was full of loopholes, but as a pioneer, if he did not do it, who else could do it? Hiding in this small border town with his tail between his legs, he might spend a few decades to touch the threshold of industrialization, but he was not a Taoist cultivator. How many decades could he have? If he wanted to lead the times forward and stand at the forefront of reform, he must have the spirit of adventure. Just as he was recording these thoughts on the parchment, Bhairav opened the door and came in. Chapter 54. Perrault did not expect that he would return so soon. He did not want to leave the warm house in such a cold winter, especially when the demonic beasts were wreaking havoc. However, the Duke of Ryan had asked him to hand over this hot document to the fourth prince. Of course, he knew the contents of the document. In fact, all the upper nobles of Grey Castle were discussing this shocking news. The king of Grey Castle had fallen because of a murder, and the murderer was Gerald Wimbledon, the king's eldest son. Then the second son rushed to King City and announced that the country could not be without a king for a day, and he would ascend the throne as the second in line. However, this behavior was not accepted by everyone. Some people claimed that Gerald's trial was very strange. During the whole interrogation, he only showed up a few times, and he could not speak, and his hands were tightly tied. They hoped that after the matter was thoroughly investigated, the ownership of the throne would be decided. There were also rumors that this was just a self-directed play by the second son, Timothy Wimbledon. The real murderer was the second prince who pretended to be sad, but could not wait to ascend the throne. No matter who was right and who was wrong in this debate, the second prince, with the strong support of the prime minister, still temporarily held the supreme power of Grey Castle as the king's substitute. At the same time, he issued a recall order to all his competitors. The fight for the throne was over, and the princes and princesses should return to King City before the end of winter after receiving the edict. The new king would officially confer territories and titles according to the results of the 6 months of governance. Of course, Perrault could see the urgency in this order. Whether Timothy Wimbledon could sit on the throne depended on the reactions of the other princes and princesses. If they obediently gave up the fight for the throne and returned to King City, then he would naturally become the undisputed Wimbledon IV. The document sent to Border Town would first be transferred to Longsong Stronghold, but the Duke of Ryan himself scoffed at this recall order. When the king was alive, he still had a high degree of control over the local lords. As for the second prince, this forced ascension was extremely stiff. Coupled with the precedent of Gerald being sent to the guillotine, no one was willing to return to King's City alone. However, in the eyes of the 6 stronghold families, this was a timely order. More than 2 months ago, the Elk Earl's unauthorized action made the Duke very unhappy, especially when it failed. The prince's reaction was also very fierce. He directly sentenced Hills Med to be hanged. This time, both sides had shed all pretense of cordiality. Originally, the Duke had planned to wait until the end of the months of the demons to solve this problem, but now with this official document, he could do it more justifiably. If Roland Wimbledon returned to King City, then Border Town would naturally belong to the Duke Ryan. If he didn't return to King City, then he could use force to force him under the banner of the new king. As for who the crown would end up in, the Duke did not care too much. As for the ambassador, Perrault, he obviously didn't feel very comfortable. Last time, he swore that he would bring a new trade contract, but it turned out that the Elk family was the one behind it. Now he came, bringing the same bad news. Whether it was the death of Wimbledon III or the new king's summon, Perrault believed that the fourth prince didn't want to see either. The voyage was smooth. Grey Castle was a country in the south of the continent, so even in winter, the river wouldn't freeze. From time to time, Perrault looked at the river bank through the window. Along the way, he didn't see any starving people or people fleeing, which showed that Border Town hadn't fallen yet. This surprised him a little. After all, the last time he visited the city wall, he saw how the other side built the wall. For these muddy stone walls, Perrault didn't have much confidence. Then he was even more surprised. A sailboat with the flag of Willow Town slowly sailed on the right side of the river. This scene seemed familiar, but now it was the months of the demons. How could they have the leisure to do business while fighting the demonic beasts? If they didn't transfer all the miners to the line of defense, how could they resist those brutal monsters? 3 days later, the ship arrived at the pier of Border Town. It was still the same dilapidated wooden pier, but there was a simple wooden shed on the pier side. After the ship docked, 2 guards came out of the wooden shed and stared at the boatman's every move. Perrault immediately understood the intention of Roland's sentry here. The 4th prince obviously didn't want anyone to secretly leave the town through the waterway. He jumped off the ship's side and told the guards his identity. One of them brought a horse and accompanied him to the castle. Just like the last time, Prince Roland Wimbledon met him in the living room. Not only that, although it wasn't mealtime, the prince still ordered the attendants to serve a rich meal. Roasted pork leg, dried fish slices, a pot of unknown wild vegetables, butter bread and vegetable soup that could be seen at any banquet. It seemed that the prince liked to eat first and then talk business. Perrault thought so, but his hands didn't stop for a moment. After all, there weren't many opportunities to eat a full meal. Even the Honeysuckle family, when there were no guests, basically ate potato bread with bacon jerky. After the meal, when the dessert was served, Perrault respectfully handed over the document. Roland took it, cut the wax seal with a knife, took out the paper roll and quickly glanced at it. Then he was stunned. The king is dead? For this nominal father, Roland had no feelings at all. When he crossed over, he was already in Border Town, so he didn't even see his face. Not to mention that the 4th prince only remembered his father's complaints and dissatisfaction. Because of this, he felt that he was caught in an inexplicable embarrassment. Should he show a sad expression? The following content gave him a whiff of a conspiracy. Wimbledon III died because of the murder of his eldest son? As the new king, the 2nd prince announced the end of the fight for the throne and ordered me to return to Grey Castle today? Roland coughed twice and looked up, just in time to see Perrault's apologetic eyes. So that's how it is, he thought. The Duke of Longsong's stronghold would be happy to see this happen. Whether to obey the new king's order or not, it's a dilemma for me. He didn't bring the agreed contract, but brought bad news, like a life-threatening talisman. I'm afraid he'll feel guilty. Roland secretly smiled and folded the document again. I see. Your Highness, so what are you going to? Even if I want to leave, I have to wait until the end of the months of demons. Now it's a world of ice and snow. If I leave, what will happen to the people of Border Town? If it were someone else, Perrault would definitely say perfunctory words like, "Don't worry, Longsong's stronghold will take care of it for you," or some other diplomatic response. But in front of the 4th prince, who he had only met twice, he couldn't easily open his mouth. For the first time, Perrault felt disgusted with his identity as an ambassador. In the end, he just nodded and said, "I understand. Do you need me to deliver a reply for you?" Roland asked his attendants to bring him a pen and paper. He quickly wrote a reply, stamped it with his own seal, and gave it to Perrault. The latter glanced at the envelope. The cover was clearly written to the 2nd Prince of Grey Castle, Timothy Wimbledon, not King Wimbledon IV. Chapter 55. When Roland opened the office door, Barov had been waiting in the room for a long time. He threw the document to the assistant minister, lay down on the chair, and put his feet on the desk. If there were no outsiders present, he really wanted to hum a song. "Your Royal Highness, please restrain your grief." Barov quickly read the document and frowned. "The king has unfortunately passed away, and the murderer is the 1st prince. This is really a tragedy. I don't know what your Royal Highness is going to do next. Gerald's death is too strange. I want to see the 3rd and 5th sisters' decision," Roland said. "But in any case, there are some things we should prevent in advance. Barav looked at the prince, waiting for the other side's next words. King's City may become turbulent because of this change of royal power, so the first thing to do is to pick up your relatives and family members. Of course, more importantly, in order to prevent the second prince from using these people to threaten his vassals, for now, in order to maintain the normal administrative and financial operations of Border Town, the assistant minister was indispensable. Roland took a sip of tea and continued, "You and Carter, as well as your subordinates, write a letter to their families. I will ask my guards to take it to King's City and arrange for them to take shelter in other towns." "Don't come to Border Town?" Barav was not a fool. More than 20 years of political experience made him immediately understand the prince's meaning. Roland did not want the other side to use their families to threaten his subordinates, but he also did not want his subordinates to think that he was using their families to threaten them, so he chose a compromise. First, they would settle in other safer towns, and later when Border Town had a firm foothold, they would move here. "I know. Thank you for your concern, Your Royal Highness," the assistant minister nodded in agreement, which made Roland feel relieved. In the end, he could use too few people. Another thing about the ore trade, recently suspend the export of iron ore and only sell raw gemstones to Willow Town, he ordered. "I need to keep the iron ore for my own use. This will cause a decline in revenue, Your Royal Highness. But it won't fall too much." The miners found a new gem deposit, which can make up for part of the gap, Roland said. Moreover, there was not much business during the winter. Nobody was willing to go out to do business during the days when demonic beasts might appear at any time. In the long 4 months, it was likely that there would only be 2 or 3 rounds of business. For a lightweight single-masted sailboat, transporting raw gemstones was obviously a more cost-effective choice. "I see," Barav wrote it down. After the assistant minister left, Roland called Carter Lannis. "I need to expand the size of the militia. After the recruitment is sent out, you can arrange for a few quick and capable members to be captains in the new team. The training will be carried out in the same way as last time. Your Highness, if we continue to train according to the previous method, I'm afraid it will take a long time before the new team can be used." "That's still better than a motley crew." Roland waved his hand, signaling for him to do as he said. Although the troops trained this way were far from being an army, and were probably only at the level of university students who had completed military training, sometimes one had to compare one's combat power with one's opponent. In addition to the brainless demonic beasts, he was most likely to encounter a group of private soldiers, mercenaries, and serfs who were temporarily put together to form a mixed army. As long as they were equipped with advanced weapons, even university students would be able to deal with them. After Carter also left, Roland couldn't help but laugh. He didn't think that such a coincidence would happen. It was like sending charcoal in the snow, or a pillow when he was sleepy. Was this bad news for him? Was it a dilemma? Big mistake. He didn't know much about Garcia Wimbledon, but he knew that she wasn't the kind of person who would be trampled on. The first prince was sentenced to death in such a short time. Even if there was no inside story, he was afraid that she wouldn't easily return to King's City. He just had to follow her instructions. As long as he stayed in Border Town and didn't move, someone was bound to jump out, and the Duke of Longsong's stronghold was likely to be the first one who couldn't sit still. Otherwise, he wouldn't have hurriedly sent the recall letter to him in this terrible weather. The Duke hoped that he would see it one day earlier, so that he wouldn't be able to sleep or eat in peace. If he chose to stay in Border Town, it would be tantamount to defying the new king's will. After the months of the demons, the Duke would most likely use Timothy Wimbledon's banner to teach him a profound lesson. And this was exactly what Roland needed. If you asked what industrialization lacked the most, the answer would undoubtedly be people. It required a large number of people to invest in this large-scale production, turning people into parts to drive this huge machine. It was no exaggeration to say that the United Kingdom had the sheep-eat-man enclosure movement, which drove a large number of farmers off the land, making them free laborers, and laid a deep foundation for the later Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Age was just this rough. As long as they kept throwing educated workers into the furnace, they would be able to get rich returns. The more detailed the industrial classification, the more people needed would be multiplied. Roland had always been troubled by the population problem. Border Town had a total of more than 2,000 residents. Even with the new era of machinery, it was still only a workshop type of production. Without a large number of available people, many projects couldn't be carried out. But where would he get to steal and abduct so many people? By slaves? Not to mention where to buy thousands of slaves at one time. Adult slaves were expensive, and there was not much meaning in training them. The training period for young slaves under the age of 10 was too long. Even if you went against your conscience to hire child labor, you would have to wait for a few years. Recruit talents? How many people could be attracted to this kind of border area? And the cost would only be greater than buying slaves. Encourage more children? Forced marriage? Forget it. It wasn't that he didn't set his eyes on Longsong's stronghold, but the kingdom was in a stable state. If he attacked the surrounding lords, it would simply be a joke. And the Duke of Ryan also didn't dare to openly target him. He could only secretly trip him up. But now it was different. After Timothy ascended the throne, he was eager for all his competitors to disappear. From this recall order you can see his eagerness. Duke of Ryan obviously also saw this. Once the old king's constraints, as the ruler of the Western Territory, it would be strange if he didn't do something. This was the opportunity Roland had been waiting for a long time. As the border of the kingdom, Longsong's stronghold had been operating for 100 years, with nearly 10,000 permanent residents. And behind the stronghold, there was a large piece of land and defenseless towns. As long as he defeated the Duke of Longsong's stronghold and took the city, he could get a large number of free people, and at the same time complete the primitive accumulation of wealth. What better way to obtain a population than to annex? What better way to accumulate wealth than to plunder? This news was like a lighthouse dispelling the fog, illuminating the direction Roland was heading. Chapter 56. Nightingale walked slowly along the mountain path. The road under her feet was only as wide as her shoulders. On her side was a huge stone wall, and on the opposite side was a steep mountain rock. The distance between the two was about 10 feet wide, and in the middle was a deep ravine. She carefully leaned against the stone wall to avoid slipping. Looking up, there was only a faint light in the sky, like a silver thread hanging in the night sky. But she knew that it was just afternoon. Even if it was daytime, she still needed to hold up a torch, because the light coming through the rock wall was not enough to illuminate the road ahead. After walking for a long time, she even had the illusion that she was walking inside the mountains. The only advantage here was that, despite the cold wind howling in the mountains and the heavy snow swirling in the air, the canyon walls were never affected. Occasionally, a few snowflakes would fall from the top of her head, falling on the mountain wall or on the trail, and soon turning into water vapor. The temperature here was not commensurate with the outside world, and occasionally she could see the hot air rising from the abyss under her feet. If not for this, she would not have dared to go to the impassable mountain range alone during the months of the demons. The fog could hide her figure, but it could not isolate the temperature. If she walked against the cold wind, she estimated that in less than an hour she would freeze to death in the snow. But Nightingale did not want to stay here for even a moment, because she always felt that something was watching her in the darkness, making her feel creepy. If she could, Nightingale wanted to walk through the fog, but unfortunately, her physical strength did not support her. Using her ability for a long time would soon exhaust her. Nightingale raised the torch, and the opposite mountain rock flickered. In the faint light of the torch, she could occasionally see shadows of different sizes on the opposite stone wall. Nightingale knew that those were caves, because they were very deep, the light could not penetrate them, and they looked like a group of dark shadows. And in the same position on the stone wall, there was a corresponding deep cave. This reminded her of the rumors about the North Slope mine. It was said that it was an underground monster's lair, and there were many forks in the road, all of which were dug by the monsters. And the North Slope mountain was just a corner of the impassable mountain range. Could it be that these caves were also connected to the mine? The thought made her shiver. To the west of the impassable mountain range was a barren land that no one had ever set foot in. If it was said that one could dig countless holes in the towering mountains that stretched for hundreds of miles, then perhaps only the monsters that lived in the barren land would be able to do it. She didn't dare to think about it anymore. She focused on moving forward. Finally, there was a change in the road ahead. The shoulder width of the road split into two, one slightly going up, and the other straight down, extending deeper into the darkness. No one knew where this road would lead to. Standing at the bifurcation point, the feeling of being watched had become very strong, as if there were countless pairs of eyes staring at her in the darkness, making her mouth dry and her scalp numb. Nightingale gritted her teeth, activated the mist, and quickly walked up. Soon, that strange feeling disappeared. As they ascended, the surrounding temperature gradually dropped, and the silver line above their heads grew wider. Half a quarter of an hour later, a huge cave appeared in front of her on the right. The lower edge of the cave was slightly higher than the road. She lifted her leg and stepped into the cave. She could faintly see the light of fire in the depths of the cave. This was the hiding place of the Witch Cooperation Association. When Nightingale stepped out of the mist, she was immediately discovered by the witch in charge of guarding. A wall of black gas appeared in front of her, but soon disappeared. In the darkness, her companion's surprised voice sounded, "You're back." Finally back, she thought. But when she noticed the two white cloth wrapped around her companion's arm, Nightingale's excited mood sank again. "There are two more sisters." The other's voice paused for a moment. It's Ain and Ai she. They didn't make it past adulthood 5 days ago." She reluctantly smiled. "This often happens, doesn't it? Let's not talk about this. Let's go to the camp. Vendi has been talking about you for a long time." Ain and Ai she, a pair of twins from a wealthy family in the Fallen Dragon Ridge, ended their lives in this deep mountain. Nightingale sometimes wondered if she had done the right thing. If she hadn't taken them with her, at least they would have been able to enjoy a well-fed life before they died. They wouldn't have to follow everyone else to live a wandering and homeless life. But thinking of Vendi, Nightingale's heart was filled with warmth. If Vendi hadn't reached out to help her, she was afraid that she would still be like a puppet, being used as a tool that could be discarded at any time. "That's right, I have to tell her this news as soon as possible. I have to tell all my sisters that they don't need to hide like mice anymore. There are people who are willing to accept them, and they might even be able to safely pass the Day of Awakening every year." Walking into the camp, Nightingale saw a familiar figure squatting by the campfire and preparing food. She hadn't arrived yet, but she already couldn't help but shout, "Vendi, I'm back." The other's movements paused, she raised her head, and then revealed a familiar smile that Nightingale was familiar with. "Veronica, welcome home." Vendi was an extremely kind-hearted woman, and she was also one of the earliest members of the Witch Cooperation Association. Now in her 30s, she didn't have a single wrinkle on her face. Her straight reddish-brown hair almost reached her waist, and her facial features were mature and full of charm. To anyone, she was like a big sister. She cared about every sister of the Witch Cooperation Association. Whether it was daily life or psychological counseling, she would do everything within her power to help them. If it weren't for Vendi, the Witch Cooperation Association wouldn't have been able to gather so many witches so quickly. It was because of her that Nightingale decided to break away from her family and embark on the journey to find the Holy Mountain with her. She was also one of the few people who knew her original name. "How many times have I told you, I'm no longer the weak little girl of the past?" Nightingale smiled and shook her head. "I'm now a powerful witch. Veronica no longer exists. You used to be you. Getting rid of the nightmare of the past doesn't mean that you have to cut yourself off from the past," Vendi said softly. "Of course, as long as you like it. Nightingale, I've been waiting for you to come back. It must have been hard on you." "Yeah," Nightingale stepped forward and hugged her. "Thank you." After a while, Vendi asked, "What happened to the girl? You weren't able to save her." Chapter 57. But Vendi wasn't as excited as her. Instead, she asked in a skeptical tone, "Did he really say that?" "Yes, before I arrived there, he had already saved Anna and Nana. The prince never thought that the power of witches came from the devil. He said that this power belongs to us." Nightingale suddenly stopped. She realized that the other side didn't believe what she had said. "Well," she thought, "this isn't Vendi's fault. If it were me, I'm afraid I wouldn't have yearned for it just by the description of a witch. The witches had been oppressed for too long, All the way from the eastern region to the impassable mountain range, there were too many living examples in front of them. Being betrayed and abandoned was already a common thing. They had long been unable to easily trust others. Thinking of this, her excitement gradually subsided. Perhaps this trip wouldn't be as smooth as she thought. Vendi, you know my branch of ability. In addition to seeing the flow of magic, I can also tell whether people are lying or not, Nightingale said seriously. I once asked him, why did he take such a big risk for the witches to go this far? He answered me, Border Town doesn't care about one's background. He wants all witches to become free people. If he does this, he will become a thorn in the side of the church. Vendi frowned. Even if the prince doesn't know what this means, don't you? Nightingale couldn't help but chuckle. My original idea was almost the same as yours. I asked him, can this really be done? Guess what he answered me? She paused, then said word by word, if you don't take this step, you will never know the answer. You didn't lie. I didn't lie, Nightingale said with certainty. It sounds unbelievable, Vendi said in a slightly relaxed tone. For this friend of hers of many years, she really couldn't think of a reason why the other side would lie to her. Yes, Nightingale had the same feeling. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, coupled with the ability to verify it, I'm afraid she wouldn't have made up her mind so quickly. Now that he thought about it, it was just like what Roland had said to him on the watchtower on the city wall. He rarely lied. In the past 2 months, Nightingale had been very satisfied with him, except for the fact that he had not honestly explained the use of Ice Ray. Of course, she didn't care about that little deception. It would have been strange if he had completely revealed his secret to a witch he had only known for a short time. Tonight, when everyone comes back, I want to tell this important news to my sisters. She looked at Vendi and said in a low voice, I hope you can help me convince everyone. When evening came, the witches who were busy outside began to return to the camp one after another. Seeing that Nightingale had returned safely, everyone was very happy. They surrounded her and asked all sorts of questions. Seeing the white bandages wrapped around their arms, Nightingale felt heavy in her heart. After casually answering a few questions, she raised her hand to calm everyone down. What followed was a long narration, starting from the time she sneaked into Border Town, to her encounter with Roland, Anna and Nana, to the construction of the city wall, to the assembly of the steam engine, and finally to the fight against the demonic beasts, as well as Anna's adulthood. Nightingale took out the forcibly taken steam engine blueprint from her bosom to prove to everyone that she wasn't lying. Most of the witches who joined the Witch Cooperation Association lived in isolation. It was difficult for them to imagine life in the outside world, so they all listened attentively. When Nightingale said that Anna hadn't suffered any pain and had safely passed her day of adulthood, the crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. This was a major event that had troubled the witches for a lifetime. They had endured a life of starvation and a life where they didn't have enough to eat or wear clothes to protect themselves from the cold. They had come to the impassable mountain range in order to find the legendary Holy Mountain. If what Nightingale said was true, that there was a territory where the Lord was willing to accept them, and at the same time, there was a possibility that they would be free from the demonic bite. Wouldn't that be even more perfect than the Holy Mountain residence? At this moment, the crowd parted to make a path, and a witch with green hair and half a snake-shaped face walked in front of Nightingale. Respected mentor, hello? Nightingale bowed to her. The person who had come was the founder of the Witch Cooperation Association, Snake Witch Kara. In the association, the sisters called her mentor. I heard the stories you told. Her voice was hoarse and hollow. Do you want to tell everyone that what we are doing now is wrong? No, mentor, those are not stories, I mean. Enough. She impatiently waved her hand. I don't know what you encountered in Border Town to make you say such words. A prince, but sympathizes with witches? It's almost as ridiculous as sympathizing with frogs. She sneered, turned around, opened her arms and asked loudly, Sisters, have you all forgotten how those mortals dealt with you? Without waiting for Nightingale to explain, she continued to accuse, yes, mortals, that group of incompetent people pretended to be God's mighty name, pointing their sharp blades and whips at us. Without the God's stone of retaliation, how could they trample witches under their feet? Our ability doesn't come from the devil, but from the gift of God. The authority of God shouldn't be exercised by the church, but by us. Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association. The holy mountain recorded in the ancient books is the residence of God. Nightingale couldn't believe her ears, although she had always thought that the leader of the Witch Cooperation Association had a somewhat eccentric character, and that she had an extraordinary dedication to finding the holy mountain, but she was still far from being crazy. Although Kara wasn't as approachable as Vendi, at least her concern for her sisters was genuine and sincere. But she had never thought that she would be so hostile to ordinary people. So, for the past few years, she had been suppressing her hatred and anger? The so-called not interfering in the affairs of the world was just to accumulate power, in exchange for one day Thunder's revenge in the future? Nightingale thought to herself, so what is it that makes her not want to hide anymore? Could it be, we have found a clue to the opening of the holy mountain, just as recorded in the ancient books? In another 20 days, when the bloody moon appears in the night sky, we will pass through the huge stone door rising from the ground, and we will reach the final shore. She turned back and looked directly at Nightingale. You have been deceived by mortals. We have been living in a huge deception since we were born. The suffering on the day of adulthood is God's test of our spirit and body. Only the strong-willed, tenacious people deserve real power. As for the church, she sneered twice. A group of mortals dare to act in the name of God. Sooner or later they will all go to hell. And you, child, it's not too late to turn back. Kara paused. Forget the stories you told me. I can forgive your ignorance and mistakes, and once again accept you as a member of the Witch Cooperation Association. Together with us, we will find our eternal life in the holy mountain. Nightingale's heart had completely cooled down. The suffering is a test? Those sisters who suffered the pain of the day of awakening, those who couldn't survive, are not worth mentioning? This statement is exactly the same as the church's. But the surrounding witches unexpectedly showed an expression of approval. Vendi also didn't stand up. She suddenly felt bored. In the blink of an eye, the founder of the Witch Cooperation Association, the Witch's Guide, had become a stranger. She shook her head. In that case, I will take away the sisters who are willing to leave with me, and those who decide to stay here. I wish you good luck. Just as Nightingale was about to leave, a slight tingling came from her calf. She looked down and found a shining blue-striped black snake biting her calf. This was a magic snake, silent, capable of using a variety of poisons, Kara's usual ability. Chapter 58. She didn't know how much time had passed, but when Nightingale woke up, she found that her hands were tied to a wooden stake, and her waist and feet were also tightly bound with ropes. She tried to struggle, but her body was tightly stuck to the wooden pole, completely unable to move. She wanted to use her ability, but the familiar feeling didn't appear. It was as if her connection with magic had been cut off. Nightingale lowered her head and found that there was a transparent prismatic stone hanging on her neck. You're awake? Kara walked in front of her. How did it feel to be petrified? To tell you the truth, I had high hopes for you, Nightingale. However, you have failed to live up to my expectations. Nightingale took a deep breath. You actually have the god's locket of retribution, Kara. Do you know what you are doing? The shackles that were originally used by the church to suppress witches were now being used by their mentor to deal with her own kind. What made her even more angry was that the crowd around her had a blank look on their faces. It seemed that they didn't think there was anything wrong with this. Damn it, Nightingale shouted from the bottom of her heart. Don't you realize that you are becoming the kind of person that witches used to hate the most? You're just a tool. Occasionally there will be some bad children who don't listen to the teachings and need to be punished, Kara said indifferently, and you, Nightingale, are that person who needs to be punished. Or, should I call you Veronica? A woman who was born into a noble family, but was reduced to a witch, and still wants to climb to a high position? I don't understand what you are saying. You disappoint me too much. When Vendi rescued you from the clutches of the nobles, I thought you would firmly stand on the side of the Witch Cooperation Association. Look at what you have done now. Just when everyone is about to find the holy mountain, you want to ruin this great situation. Kara shook her head and sneered. You want to take your sisters to a prince? Either it's because you've been kept in captivity for too long, and your servility has been deeply ingrained in you, and you have to find a master for yourself to know how to survive. Or, you want to sell them to the nobles in exchange for your former status. Everything I do is for the sake of the Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association. Nightingale suppressed her anger. At this time it was meaningless to curse. I hope that they will no longer have to suffer the devastation of the Day of Awakening. I hope that they can live a life without worrying about food and clothing. I have no intention of stopping your plan. Sisters should have the freedom to choose their own way of life. Border Town is undergoing earth-shaking changes, and the steam engine blueprint I brought is one of them. It can operate on its own, and it has infinite strength. With this machine, water can be directly drawn from the mountain stream, and people don't have to run around every day. Kara sneered, "Is that what you're talking about?" She turned around and took a sheepskin scroll from the hands of one of the witches behind her, and waved it in front of Nightingale. Although I can't understand what's drawn on it, but how can a pile of cold iron pieced together with a dead thing act independently like a living thing? Do you think we're all 3 years old? She went to the brazier and threw the scroll into the burning charcoal. Nightingale shouted in vain, and watched as the design turned into ashes in the brazier. "My patience has run out, now I'll give you one last chance." Kara pulled an iron spine from the brazier. The tip of the spine was already burning red. "If you confess to all the Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association, and admit that you were bewitched by the nobles, I can spare your life, but you will still be whipped. This is a lesson for you to be so gullible to the enemy. If you still refuse to repent, I have no choice but to pierce your heart with this iron spine, and nail your body to a stake, so that everyone can learn a lesson from you." She said word by word, "Don't waste my last mercy, tell me your decision." Nightingale looked at the iron spine that was slowly approaching her. She could even feel the burning heat coming from its tip. If it was her cowardly self from before, wouldn't she have already bowed her head and admitted her mistake? But she had already bid farewell to her past, and was no longer a timid girl. She was Nightingale, a powerful witch, and even death could not make her surrender. She closed her eyes, waiting for the final moment to come. She didn't know why, but in Nightingale's mind, Roland's figure emerged. "Stuff!" Someone shouted. She was slightly startled and opened her eyes. Wendy walked out of the crowd and said to Kara, "Mentor, look at the white cloth wrapped around your arm. We have already experienced so many parting, do you want to add another one?" Kara was stunned. She didn't know what to say. "What, even you were deceived by her?" "Wake up, Wendy, those are just lies." "I don't know," Wendy shook her head. "I didn't intend to go with her to Border Town, but I think she's right. Sisters should have the freedom to choose their own way of life." She turned her head and asked loudly, "Who wants to leave with her?" No one in the crowd answered, and the scene fell into silence. "So let her leave alone," Wendy said. "She didn't do anything to harm the Witch Cooperation Association. I can't just watch you kill her." Nightingale now fully understood the meaning of Wendy's words. Her heart couldn't help but feel a surge of sadness. Even Wendy didn't fully believe her. That's why she remained silent when she needed her help to convince the crowd. But she was still the kind-hearted witch who cared for everyone. Even if she didn't agree with her point of view, she would still lend a helping hand. After Wendy said these words, whispers came from the crowd, and then several people stood up. "Yes, since she is willing to return to the secular world, let her go. The church and the illness have taken away too many of our sisters. Mentor, please think twice." "All of you shut up." Kara was furious. "If we let her go, what if a second or a third Nightingale appears? If she sells the location of our camp to the church, we will have nowhere to escape." Before her voice fell, she forcefully stabbed out with the iron spine in her hand, but Wendy was a step faster, rolling up a strong wind and blowing Kara away. Then she threw a coin, raised her hand, and with a wave of her hand, a rapid airflow wrapped around the coin, whistling towards Nightingale. When the airflow approached Nightingale, it instantly disappeared, but the coin still maintained its inertia and accurately hit the god's stone of retaliation in front of her neck. The crystal-clear diamond-shaped stone immediately shattered. "Traitor!" Kara climbed up from the ground and screamed. She stretched out her left and right hands towards Wendy and Anna. Two snake shadows appeared out of thin air. One of them opened its mouth and bit the back of Wendy's hand, while the other one pounced on empty air. The rope slipped to the ground, still in its original position, but Nightingale was nowhere to be seen. Thinking of the other's ability, Kara broke out in a cold sweat. She mobilized all her magic, shining with various colors of magic snakes swarmed out from her chest, forming a wall of snakes, and at the same time, she quickly retreated. However, Nightingale was faster than her. Chapter 59. Broadcast. Pay attention to Chidian reading. Get the first news of 515 red envelopes. Students who haven't grabbed red envelopes since the new year, this time you can show your skills. Smiley face, mentor. Seeing Kara fall, the witches panicked and surrounded her. Idiot. She covered her wound, only feeling that her lower body had completely lost feeling. Quickly go kill that traitor for me. At this time, Nightingale had already taken Vendi and escaped into the fog. Back at the fork, she saw that Vendi's forearm had already fallen into a coma. The venom was gradually spreading. She could not hesitate any longer. She gritted her teeth, rolled up Kara's sleeves, tied the upper edge of her arm with a cloth, and then took out a hiltless dagger from the sole of her shoe and forcefully stabbed down. After a quarter of an hour, she cut off Vendi's entire arm, took off her robe and carefully wrapped it, then took out 2 straps and tied it tightly behind her back. As long as she could return to Border Town alive, Nana would be able to make this broken arm as good as new. But could she really go back alive? It took her 3 days to come here alone, and carrying someone on her back would only be slower. If she walked too fast and accidentally slipped down the trail, she was not sure that she could climb back up. Vendi's arm was still oozing blood. She would not be able to hold on for another 3 or 4 days, but Nightingale had no choice. She could not leave Vendi alone. Vendi was injured because of her. Do you need help? Hearing the sudden question, Nightingale almost at the same time released her fog and took a defensive posture. But there was no one in front of her. Don't be nervous, I don't want to fight with you. Nightingale looked up and found that the other side was floating in the air. Who are you? My name is Lightning. I just joined the Witch Cooperation Association not long ago, and I run around every day. It's normal that you don't know me. She pretended to be relaxed and smiled. But I know you, the famous Nightingale, the assassin of the shadow. Did Kara send you? No, don't misunderstand. Lightning slowly landed on one foot. I want to go with you. Nightingale wondered if she had misheard. Well, you said that we should have the freedom to choose our own lifestyle. She paused. I choose to be with you. It's that simple. Why? Nightingale was completely disappointed with the Witch Cooperation Association. Even Vendi couldn't fully believe in herself, but the girl in front of her, she was indeed a child, about 14 or 15 years old, similar to Nana. He had clean and neat short golden hair, and his face was in high spirits. His words were filled with confidence that did not match his age. She didn't wear the robe issued by the Witch Cooperation Association. Instead, she wore a set of close-fitting clothes and trousers, plus a leather jacket full of pockets and patches. Finally, she wore 2 thick leather belts that she didn't know where she got them from. At first glance, she looked like a man. Because of what you said, the black machine that puffs out white gas, the gray powder that turns into stone when touched by water, and the snow-white machine that can burst out thunderous sounds, I want to see them. She raised her head and said, I'm determined to become an explorer. Of course, I want to go to interesting places. What kind of reason is this? Nightingale was stunned. It sounded completely out of tune, but her consciousness told her that the other side was not lying. I don't understand. Since you want to be an adventurer, why did you join the Witch Cooperation Association? Not an adventurer, an explorer. Lightning emphasized, I'm not the same as those people who are paid to do things. They say that I'm an adventurer, but in fact, I'm just a jackal who does all kinds of dirty work. But an explorer only does things out of interest. As for why I joined the Witch Cooperation Association, she confidently said, isn't looking for the Holy Mountain a great adventure? But Kara doesn't understand the spirit of adventure. She is completely addicted to the ancient book, and everything she finds on the road is related to the content recorded in the ancient book. What stone door rising from the ground? It's just 2 weathered stone pillars. If she keeps looking like this, she will never be able to find the real holy mountain. An explorer must honestly record everything he or she sees. Following the map is not what an explorer should do. This is what my father repeatedly emphasized. Although she wanted to ask who her father was, and how he could raise such a strange daughter, Nightingale knew that now was not the time to chat. Vendi's life was in danger, and since the other side didn't have any malicious intentions, it would be good to have another helper. Is your ability to fly? Aha, Lightning nodded. Even if I drag you too, I can still move forward like the wind. Then I'll have to trouble you. Nightingale nimbly tied Vendi to her back, and then climbed onto Lightning's back, her hands wrapped around her chest. It's really heavy. Lightning bit her teeth and slowly rose up. I think, probably, maybe, I can't move forward like the wind. The two of them took turns to move forward, and when Lightning was exhausted, Nightingale would carry her through the fog. When her physical strength was restored, Nightingale would hang on her back and let her fly forward. Only when both of them were exhausted and had to stop to rest, would Nightingale tentatively ask her some basic questions, such as her father, her family. And Lightning said that her father was the world's greatest explorer, and his footprints were all over the ocean. He owned an ocean-going fleet, and the crew affectionately called him Thunder. Her mother died early when she was young, so she didn't have many memories. During a voyage in a storm and torrential rain, the ship hit a reef and capsized. She was washed away by the ocean current on an island, and lost contact with her father. On the island, Lightning used the knowledge and skills taught by her father to spend nearly 2 months, and in the winter she awakened as a witch. Then she flew all the way west, across the strait to the south of Grey Castle, and after several twists and turns, finally joined the Witch Cooperation Association. She felt that as long as she persisted in exploring, one day, she would be able to meet her father again in some strange place, if he was still alive. Nightingale didn't get much useful information from these conversations. Her ability could only be used to distinguish whether the other person was lying or not, but couldn't determine the truth of the content. In other words, as long as someone said that the sun was square, and believed it, her ability would also determine that it was true. However, there was some information that could be inferred, such as that she must have been born in a wealthy family. A family that was still struggling with food and clothing was unlikely to have the leisure to explore, and having an ocean-going fleet was also consistent with this judgment. Therefore, a wealthy ocean-going merchant might be Thunder's true identity. And with Lightning's blonde hair, it didn't seem to be the blood of the kingdom of the mainland, but more like the people of the fjords across the sea. During this time, Vendi woke up several times, and Nightingale spent a lot of effort to give her a few mouthfuls of water, and then she quickly fell into a coma. Feeling that the other's body temperature was getting lower and lower, Nightingale became more and more anxious. With the two of them taking turns to run, they only took a day and a half to finish the trail that would have taken 3 days. At the entrance, the horse that they had received from the prince was still tied in the same place, and the pile of straw in front of it was mostly eaten. Nightingale carried Vendi on her back, turned over the horse, and led Lightning towards Border Town without stopping. Chapter 60. Broadcast. Pay attention to Chidian reading and get the first-hand news of the 515 red envelope. Students who haven't grabbed a red envelope since the new year can now show their skills. Border Town's second recruitment was much smoother than the first, thanks to the winter food rationing, so the militia could get more and better food. Every week on family visiting days, many of the militia members would secretly pass the bread and dried meat they saved on weekdays to their relatives. Roland told Carter and Iron Axe not to interfere in this matter, and those relatives happily brought the food home and spread the news to their neighbors. An army made up of people was an excellent propaganda example in itself. Talking among neighbors was much more effective than deliberate propaganda in City Hall. Now most people in the old town knew about this matter. His Highness Militia not only had a generous salary, but also could eat 3 meals a day, and the battle with the demonic beasts didn't seem so dangerous. Therefore, during the second recruitment, the number of people in the old town greatly increased, and even residents from the new town came to sign up. The number of people who met the requirements was far higher than Roland expected, so the second militia was expanded to 200 people, and Carter led the training on weekdays. When the horn sounded, they would go to the city wall and be on standby as auxiliary troops. Both the chief knight and the assistant minister had objected to this. At present, the first militia was already competent enough to fight against the demonic beasts. At this time, it seemed unnecessary to recruit a second militia with twice the number of the first one. Higher food and salary than the general people would lead to an increase in the financial burden, and the extra golden dragon would not play a significant role. But Roland insisted on his decision, because these people were not prepared to fight against the demonic beasts. For the time being, he did not dare to tell his subordinates about the plan brewing in his mind. Before the Duke took action, he already had a plan to attack the stronghold. If he said this idea now, Carter and Barov would not be able to accept it. Longsong's stronghold was different from Border Town. As the official border of the Grey Castle Kingdom, its walls were 10 meters high, and they were made of bricks. The Duke and the 6 families of the western region were stationed in the inner city, and the number of soldiers they could mobilize was estimated to be about 1,000. Theoretically speaking, it was impossible to take down a fortress with less than 300 people in the militia, even if they were equipped with guns that transcended the era. And because of the existence of the god's stone of retaliation, witches could not be used as beheading weapons. Roland had repeatedly confirmed this point with Nightingale. Prominent nobles like the Duke of Ryan and the 6 noble families would definitely spare no effort in purchasing the god's stone of retaliation. Of course, to the outside world, it was called a donation. This stone, which could only be obtained by donating several to dozens of golden dragon stones, had the ability to seal a witch's ability within a certain range. It was the church's most powerful weapon against the demons, and it was also the church's biggest annual income. Roland's only chance lay in a field battle. Thanks to this era, most of the battles between lords were conscripted. If he wanted to gather his subordinates, they wouldn't run away halfway. The lords would basically go with them, which gave Roland a chance to annihilate them. However, he was still at a loss as to how to grasp this opportunity. After all of his experience in luring the enemy came from movies and television works or historical stories. He had never used it in practice. Since he couldn't understand, he thought it would be better to do what he was good at first. Roland stretched his body, walked out of the office, and went to the wooden shed in the backyard. The assembled steam engine number 2 stood quietly in the middle of the field. At first glance, its appearance was much smoother than the first steam engine. The weld marks of the large parts were no longer as uneven as before. This was the masterpiece of Anna's new ability. Her green fire could drill into small gaps to fuse, and the overall quality of the large parts was better than before. In the spirit of research and development, the follow-up model was better than the original model, and the magically modified model was better than the follow-up model. The steam engine 2 had been equipped with a centrifugal governor. As the first automatic control system and feedback system in human history, its emergence could be said to be extraordinary. The structure of the governor was very simple. The main body consisted of 2 hinged thin rods with iron balls welded at the ends and a rotating main rod. At first glance, it looked like a bamboo dragonfly that he often played with when he was a child. As long as he quickly rubbed the bamboo rod, the 2 rotating fan blades would automatically rise due to the centrifugal force. For the governor, the 2 iron balls were equivalent to the fan blades. When the steam engine worked, it drove the main rod to rotate. When the output was too high, the ball's speed increased. Under the influence of the centrifugal force, it gradually rose and drove the lever to close the valve. When the output became low, the ball's speed slowed down. Under the influence of gravity, the position of the ball was reduced, and the valve was enlarged. This kept the steam engine running at a relatively constant power. With the governor, the second steam engine could now undertake some more delicate processing tasks. The gears that were previously delivered to the blacksmith shop were all completed, and were now neatly placed in the corner of the shed. From the perspective of industrial assembly line production, this batch of gears could not be called a qualified work. All of them were thrown into the defective box, waiting to be melted down. But in this era, they were rare works of art. The involute design of the gears had a natural sense of harmony. The wheel was soaked in lard, exuding a unique luster of metal. In addition to the gear set, the carpenters were responsible for planing the base and cap, as well as other parts were ready. He asked the guard outside to call Anna, and together they began to assemble the first steam-powered boring machine. In Roland's plan, this was the fastest way to mass-produce firearms. Relying on the blacksmith to hammer out a barrel was extremely time-consuming and laborious. But with the boring machine, he only needed to pour out iron rods, and then directly use the boring knife to drill holes. In one day, he could produce more than a dozen barrels. At the same time, by replacing the knife head, the boring machine could also be used to cut the rifling. With the rifling, the firing accuracy of the flintlock would be further improved. In this way, he was confident that before the end of the winter, the two militias, nearly 300 people, would be fully armed. But Roland still couldn't guarantee that his people would be able to calmly load and shoot in the face of the knight's charge, instead of dropping their weapons and running away. After all, the two militias were established too recently, and they didn't have any experience in fighting with others. Therefore, he had to bring more powerful firepower to the stage and completely defeat the enemy before they could form a charge. That was the artillery. As the god of war in the history of human war, the lethality and deterrence brought by the artillery was not something that firearms could compare with. A 6-pound field cannon, its range was enough to launch an attack when the enemy was assembled. In this era, it was impossible for the mixed army to maintain discipline under the attack of artillery. As long as they were equipped with 3 or 4 field cannons, the enemy wouldn't even have the opportunity to charge. He had already planned step by step. With the manual milling machine, he would be able to process usable gears. With gears and the second steam engine, he would be able to get a steam-powered boring machine. And with the steam boring machine, he would be able to process a variety of gun barrels and cannon barrels. There were still at least 2 months before the end of the months of the demons. As long as the plan was implemented smoothly, Border Town's militia would have the power to fully compete with the Duke's army. Chapter 61. Latest news. Tomorrow is 515, Chidien's anniversary celebration, the day with the most benefits. In addition to the gift bag and the school bag, this time the 515 red envelope must be flipped. There is no reason not to snatch the red envelope. Set the alarm clock. Just as Roland squatted on the ground to install the base, 3 figures suddenly emerged from the void. When they landed, they staggered and fell to the ground together. Anna was shocked, and in the blink of an eye, a cluster of green flames rose into a wall of fire, blocking in front of the 2 people. Roland looked up and found that one of the women was Nightingale, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. She looked to be in a very sorry state, and her cheeks were abnormally red. Even though it was cold outside, her forehead was covered with dense beads of sweat. "Your Royal Highness, please call Nana, hurry up." She raised her head and shouted, her anxiety evident in her words. Roland had already noticed that the woman tied to her back was pale, and her eyes were closed. Half of her arm was empty, and the cloth wrapped around the wound had been dyed dark red by the blood that had seeped out. "Carden, go to the hospital and bring Nana here." Roland's heart tightened, and he shouted towards the door. "Yes, Your Royal Highness." In addition to these 2 people, there was also a little girl who was held under Nightingale's armpit. She seemed to be fine, and her eyes were curiously looking around. "Are you hurt?" Roland stepped forward and untied the cloth on Nightingale's back, untying the one-armed woman. "I'm fine, Your Royal Highness." Cough cough. "I'm sorry, I couldn't bring back the Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association," Nightingale gasped, her voice weak. Obviously, she had experienced a long journey, and her physical strength was almost overdrawn. "You don't have to say anything, just have a good rest first." Roland carried the unconscious and seriously injured woman, and then let Anna support Nightingale, and the 5 people returned to the castle together. Nightingale's room was next to Anna's. He ordered the maid to start a fire and prepare a large bucket of hot water in the room. After Nana arrived, he gave a simple explanation about cleaning the wound before the treatment, and then left the room. As long as she didn't die, Nana could heal her wounds and save her life. Nightingale even brought back the woman's severed arm, but it had been bleeding for a long time, so he didn't know if it could be reattached. The cleaning and treatment that followed required him to take off his clothes. As a member of the new generation that grew up under the red flag, Roland consciously chose to avoid it. But how did things turn out like this? He thought, could it be that the Witch Cooperation Association's camp was attacked by demonic beasts, and only 3 people managed to escape? If that was the case, it would be a great loss. He paced back and forth outside the door anxiously. About an hour later, the door was pushed open, and the first to come out was the little girl who had returned with Nightingale. She looked completely unharmed. She nodded at Roland. "You're just as Nightingale said." Roland was stunned. "What did she say about me?" "A prince who cares about the witches." The girl gently closed the door. Unfortunately, this news was too shocking, so most people in the Witch Cooperation Association didn't believe her. In fact, I didn't believe it, but as my father said, the world is so big, there are all kinds of people. "My name is Lightning, Your Highness. It's a pleasure to meet you." Then she bowed her head and put her right hand on her left shoulder. That was probably a salute. But Roland's mind didn't pay attention to this. He keenly captured the words. Most people didn't believe her. The Witch Cooperation Association's camp was not attacked by demonic beasts. Attacked? No, why do you ask? She pointed her index finger at her forehead, and then showed an expression of sudden realization. "Ah, I understand. The elder sister with the broken arm is called Vendi. She was injured by the Witch Cooperation Association's mentor, Kara." Then, Lightning roughly told him the whole story. Roland was silent after listening, so it was like this. He thought, I really underestimated the cruel oppression of the witches in this world. Over the years, the witches' distrust of the church and the upper nobles had reached its peak. And Kara was one of the radical members. Listening to Lightning's description, the first thing the leader of the Witch Cooperation Association wanted to do after gaining enough power was to eradicate people like me. But fortunately, Nightingale came back safely. Not only that, but she also brought back 2 witches to Border Town. As for the Model Community Project, Roland thought about it and decided to let Carr continue to build it. Even if he didn't need them now, there would always be more witches in the future. "Are you also a member of the Witch Cooperation Association?" "Not anymore," she said. "Like Vendi and Nightingale, now that we have come out, we can't go back. I'm afraid that Kara will eat us alive." "She was stabbed by Nightingale, but she still survived?" Roland asked with a frown. "Probably. There is a witch in the camp called Leaf. She can increase the efficacy of herbs several times." Lightning thought for a moment. With more blood-clotting grass and blood-dissolving agent, it shouldn't be a problem to save Kara's life. But compared to your witch, the effect is much worse. That's really troublesome, he thought. I don't have to worry about being targeted by the church, but in the end I'm being targeted by the witches. Fortunately, the other party's main purpose is to find the Holy Mountain, so now they should have no time to find trouble with Nightingale. "You said before that you didn't fully believe Nightingale's words, so why did you escape from the Witch Cooperation Association with her?" "Because of the black machine that breathes white gas, and the gray powder that turns into stone when touched by water, and the explosion of the thunderous sound of the snow." Lightning repeated what she had said to Nightingale. "There may not be a prince who treats witches well, but she shouldn't have lied to me, otherwise it would be impossible for her to make up such a vivid story. This is the intuition of an explorer." "That's right. The big thing I saw in the yard was the black machine that can spit white gas." Nightingale said it was called a steam engine. An explorer? Roland automatically ignored the last question. "Yes, an explorer." She emphasized each word. "This is the reason why I chose to follow Nightingale here. An explorer is full of curiosity towards all things unknown." Roland secretly sighed. This is a Chunibu disease. To be able to pursue things outside of survival in this era, she must have come from a rich family. Looking at her tomboy dress and her short blonde hair, he asked, "Are you really not called Israel?" "My name is Lightning," the little girl said with her head held high. At this moment, Anna and Nana also pushed open the door and came out. "How is it?" Roland asked. "Is the treatment going well?" Seeing Nana nod, he finally felt relieved. Generally speaking, a severed limb should be reconnected within 6 to 8 hours. Beyond this time, the success rate of the operation would be greatly reduced. But Lightning said that it took them nearly a day to get here from the camp. At this time the limb port was in a state of gradual atrophy. It was almost impossible to reconnect the nerves with conventional surgery. It could only be said that Nana's healing ability was really amazing. The little girl also seemed a little tired. It seemed that this treatment had consumed a lot of her energy. Roland encouraged her. "You've worked hard. After dinner tonight, you can sleep with Anna. Of course, I also have to bring Sir Pine," he thought. Chapter 62. Latest news. Tomorrow is 515, Chidien's anniversary celebration, the day with the most benefits. In addition to the gift bag and the school bag, this time the 515 red envelope must be flipped. There is no reason not to snatch the red envelope. Set the alarm clocks. Today's matter made Roland not in the mood to assemble the steam boring machine. For dinner, he deliberately asked the chef to prepare a particularly rich meal, including unlimited black pepper steak and fried eggs, which made Anna and Lightning's bellies bulge. Nana tried her best to maintain her etiquette, but in the end her small mouth was still chewing until it was shiny. In addition to the dining room, he also asked the maid to prepare an insulated porcelain filled with soft stewed meat and wheat porridge, and sent it to Nightingale's room. As long as they woke up, they would be able to eat warm food. After dinner, the next step was to arrange the rooms. Fortunately, the previous lord of Border Town was very ostentatious, a small town born for mining and early warning. Its castle was built according to the standard of a medium-sized town. In Roland's familiar words, it was a living area of 900 square meters, a total of 3 floors, with a single-story villa, with watchtowers and arrow towers at the 4 corners. It also came with a front yard and a back garden. Roland arranged Lightning's room opposite Anna's door, and the next room was intended for Vendi after she recovered. Seeing Nana stick to Anna's room like sticky candy, he couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. After returning to the office, Roland poured himself a glass of ale. After all, the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. He thought that through Nightingale he could harvest a large number of witches, lighting up the chemical, agricultural, biological and other branches of the tree of science and technology, but he didn't expect that the leader of the Witch Cooperation Association would be so hostile to the aristocracy. Neutral witches like Nightingale and Lightning were the minority. As for Vendi, according to Lightning, she didn't want to leave the Witch Cooperation Association of her own initiative, but in order to save Nightingale, she was attacked by the snake witch Kara and had to be brought here. So be it. He drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. It was better than nothing. During dinner, he roughly asked Lightning about her and Vendi's abilities, and learned that the little girl could fly freely in the air like a bird, while Vendi could use the power of wind. These 2 abilities were not very useful for science and technology, but if used well, they would still have great potential in the upcoming war. He also inquired about the abilities of the other witches in the camp, and found that they had a variety of abilities, completely without rules. Some effects could be barely explained with scientific theories, but some were completely unbelievable. For example, the creator of the Witch Cooperation Association, Kara Witch Cooperation Association, Kara, Snake, and the Snake, could be used to attack the enemy. Different snake marks represented different toxins. From what Lightning had seen so far, there were at least 2 kinds of effects, paralysis and death. But Roland found that, whether it was Anna or Kara, most of the witch's magic only had an effect at close range. For example, Anna's green fire would suddenly disappear from 5 meters away. Kara's snake couldn't leave her body too far. Nightingale and Lightning's ability had an even shorter range. If they wanted to affect foreign objects, they had to touch them. So when they faced the church's army equipped with crossbows and God's stone of retaliation, they could only flee in all directions. Roland was busy in the office until midnight, when the fire in the fireplace gradually dimmed. Roland sneezed and planned to go back to his room to sleep. As soon as he pushed open the bedroom door, he realized that something was wrong. The scene in front of him was very familiar. A woman was sitting at the head of his bed. Half of her figure was shrouded in darkness, and the light from the fire cast her shadow on the wall like a mural. But there were also many differences. She was not wearing that unchanging robe, but had changed into ordinary casual clothes. Her appearance was no longer as unfamiliar as when they first met. Instead, she was so familiar that he could recognize her at a glance. Nightingale. Roland suddenly became a little nervous. This situation, could it be, my luck is coming? Nightingale also saw the prince. She got up and slowly walked over. After only half a day of rest, her complexion was much better than when he first saw her. Her cheeks were rosy instead of pale, and her hair was no longer dull. Roland had to admit that a witch's self-recovery ability was really amazing. You've worked hard, Roland coughed and broke the silence. Why don't you rest for a while? Lightning has already told me everything. Nightingale shook her head. Roland faintly felt that something was wrong. Her expression was solemn, and her eyes were filled with an indescribable persistence. She's decided something, Roland realized. This kind of resolute look was rare even for a man, so he restrained his other emotions and concentrated on waiting for the other's next words. However, Nightingale didn't speak. She took a deep breath, then knelt down on one knee, raised a dagger with both hands, and slightly lowered her head. This was a standard knight's salute. Nobles often swore allegiance to their superiors in this way. Your Highness Roland Wimbledon, I swear to you in the name of Nightingale and Veronica, she said in a straightforward manner. As long as you treat the witches well, I'm willing to follow your orders. Whether it's to be a strong shield against the demons, or a sharp blade that cuts through the night, I'll have no fear or regret until the last moment of my life. So that's how it is, Roland thought. The Witch Cooperation Association's actions made her disappointed, so she put her hope of leading the witches forward on me. As a transmigrator himself, he should have refused. He was more accustomed to hiring or cooperating with others. If he took it a step further, they would have the same ideals and ambitions as comrades. But he knew that sometimes it was meaningless to blindly emphasize equality, freedom, and so on. Without a suitable soil for growth, even if the seeds were sown, they would rot. As a prince, before unifying the whole kingdom, it was impossible for him to deviate from his own class. Roland was silent for a moment. Then, according to the palace etiquette, he took the dagger and touched her shoulder 3 times with the back of the dagger. I accept your allegiance. Nightingale's shoulder trembled slightly, as if she had finally relaxed. Then he stretched out his right hand and held it in front of her. Nightingale took his finger and gently kissed the back of his hand. In this way, the whole set of etiquette was over. Although it was extremely inappropriate for a witch to perform the oath of allegiance, but to be able to perform this set of actions, at least it showed that Nightingale wasn't a commoner. And she had just mentioned Veronica? Is that your real name? Don't you have a surname? Roland pulled her up and asked. Yes, Your Highness. I have no intention of hiding it from you. 5 years ago, I left the Guyland family, and that surname no longer has anything to do with me. Nightingale calmly said. She had put down the last of her guard against Roland and simply told him about her past. She was born in Silver City, which was named after its rich silver mines. Her father was a viscount, and her mother was a commoner woman. Such a marriage was not common, but the two got along very well. In addition, Nightingale also had a younger brother called Hyde. She spent her childhood in Silver City, which was also the happiest time of her life. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.